We're already got people in the chat. Hello, what's going on, guys? Sean here from Hammerhead. I got my good brother with me tonight, Angry Scotian, aka Gordon James Barry Jr. And we're on here to have a conversation with you folks and hopefully raise a few eyebrows, maybe even piss off a few people. If it happens, it happens. That's not our intent, but likely. But in any case, we'll wait for a few minutes here to get some more folks in the room. Hello, Carly. What's going on? And Dapa, hello. Welcome to the stream. It's having some technical issues there. I couldn't get my microphones to work. So at any time any of us drop out, just be patient. I'm dealing with two sticks rubbed together here for internet. So until the financial situation improves a little bit, that's all I got to work with. So we're just going to do what we can do with it. Hello, Don. Welcome on here, brother. I'll just wait here for a few minutes. I got Mr. Gordon with me tonight. We figured we'd get on here and say hi to you guys. Hello, Michelle from my home province.
Good evening, everyone. How are you? I hope you're enjoying the evening, given all the kerfuffle going on and the mainstream media narrative and the political bullshit. But
see, too, there's not enough time in the day for Gordy to answer that question. Are you not angry about anything that's going on? Show of hands, who here isn't angry? Hello, hello. How you doing? Glad to have you on here. I'm just going to put a few of these messages up, guys. You're starting to pile in here now. Well, Michael, greetings. Hello, Jen. How are you? Anyway, we're having another live session here. We're going to do a little bit of a think tank. That's kind of where we get our best ideas from, it seems. Come in on a subject and we'll just start talking about things. And lots of times, because I like to be I'm not going to call myself Negative Nelly, but I kind of like to add that side of it to the conversation. Sometimes we can get ideas from that. And we're going to go ahead and do that. And also, we're going to try and simplify the process. Let's just say, for instance, you get drug into one of their courts. You don't want to be there necessarily. In fact, I'm telling you now not to go there if you can help it. But let's just say, for instance, you get drug in there and you want to simplify the process as much as possible instead of being confrontational, which is likely going to get you in trouble because we all know they don't follow even their own procedures. And they seem to have a large amount of malice towards anybody that doesn't want to play their game. I'll let Gordy talk on that. What a person that, first of all, doesn't want to be there but got drug in for whatever reason against their will. What are the processes you can do to simplify it and keep it on the most common, easy, basic thing, so people don't get flubbed up in court? Because you know yourself from us being in there and you being in there that sometimes your rational mind doesn't work very well in those situations because you're scared, you're under duress a little bit, you're a little bit fearful of what's going on in there, worried you're going to get thrown in jail or locked up or whatever. So you might not be thinking logical. So where would you go with it?
yeah, so obviously when people get in there, especially when you're learning, it seems like it's a incredibly complicated situation because I think it's because it's so foreign. People, you're looking at these. Our whole lives we've looked at these, places and courts and police and judges or whatever as some sort of an authority figure. So there's a subconscious mindset that they're above you, and of course they're gonna keep that in place. So you see the men or women acting as adjudicators, and they set up high above you on on a bench or whatever, and then the prosecutors, and of course usually there's police or sheriffs or somebody in there. Most times they're weaponized, and you're always under these threats of duress and intimidation tactics, which is what we're going to talk about a little bit tonight, section 423, how they use their own criminal code against you to try to enforce these contracts. But I think I don't know. I've been learning a lot on the fly too. Crow and I had a good long conversation last night about some of this stuff, and I think when you get jammed up, when you get confused, you should just go back to the simple basis of everything. The base is always the solid. That's the solid foundation of where you're standing from. So they can bully and intimidate and pressure and question and throw all these things at you that you're probably not. You can be prepared for some, but there's always going to be a curveball. And when you get stuck with a curveball, you just go back to the same base, and the base it can't be denied. When Sean talks about not going to court, ideally that's the best situation, but we both recognize and comprehend that when you send back your paperwork and you're basically rescinding it and rescinding their authority by doing so, that doesn't mean that they're going to accept that, because they're going to bully you and they're going to keep that intimidation tactic above, like they have power over you. So that may mean, and I've talked to some other people about this too, you can do that and that's all valid and lawful, but they may overstep that bounds because they don't follow their own rules, and then they may issue warrants to have you arrested and brought into court. So that's why, as much as it's possible, you want to stay out of the situation. You may be forced into the situation outside of your own control. So if you are in them situations, it's always best to have a little bit of preparation. Now, if there was enough time to sit down with individuals and plan out a strategy and a big speaking point, you could write everything all down. You could have it all covered and things. But the one thing that we can't do, because we're not able to be in there and help most times, is we can't control the way that they deal with the questions that you're going to pose to them. We can't control what they're going to give you for answers. And it all becomes, there's all a natural flow to it. So when you look at like lawyers, for example, bar members, when they're asking questions to a witness, they can quite easily and quickly adjust to the flow depending on the answer. So if the answer is yes or no, they already know which way they're going with the next question. But when you're up there and you don't know what the answer is, then that's where you sort of get jammed up. So you don't know what to go, because you might expect them to answer yes to something when they say no, and now you're confused and you're caught off guard. So that's why I think you just go back to the same basis point. And the other thing is, a lot of people, if you're really good at this stuff, then by all means, you should go in there and claim that court as your own and take total control of it, because you are the authority in that room. And people like David Straight or those kind of people that can do that, that's fine. But if you're not that great at this stuff, you shouldn't I don't believe that you should do that, because that's where you're going to get trapped back in their jurisdiction, because they're going to force you to make a mistake. So I think the best way to do it for the people that are just learning is pose questions and get these questions on the record. And you're kind of putting the pressure on the system at that point rather than on you. You're shifting the dynamic a bit, because they have to answer these questions on the record, and they can try to avoid it and they can try to spin some logic. But if they don't answer your question, ask them the question again, repeat the question until you get the answer and you get it on the record. So you're basically going to get them to tighten up their own noose and hang themselves, I think. And I think that doing it that way, by just asking questions, which is your right to do so, I think it's going to take a little bit more pressure off the individual standing there.
Yep, 100%. Totally agree with that. See, the problem is we're not going in there with a script, but a good thing to do is always remember that you are the authority when you're in there. It doesn't mean you have to act in an ignorant way or be standoffish. In fact, that's the opposite of what you should do. You should try and maintain some sort of zen, some sort of calmness, as hard as it is to do. And listen, nobody fights back their anger harder than I do. But you should act that way in a professional, calm demeanor, and just like Gordy was saying last night, just start asking questions. Always ask questions. Be the one that if they ask you a question, you answer back with a question. Like Judge, are you trying to claim the position of executive here this evening? Do you believe that you are the executive in this matter? If you are, then I'm not able to do business with you because I don't have any signed contract in front of me. If you're wishing to create a contract, I'm going to need you to sign or to fill out these 8,300 forms so that the right amount of tax is being done. You could also ask them, is this a transaction for a securities interest? Which it definitely is if you're in a courtroom setting, because remember, guys, of the Clearfield Doctrine, all these courts are nothing more than corporations. They have no more rights or less rights than Burger King, McDonald's, Wendy's, any business, any commerce, house of business. As a matter of fact, as in the last video I made there with the showing the Vogue show there, where that lady was talking about using the Baird Ward affidavit. The courts are actually the janitors. They're so low down in the totem pole that they're basically the janitors. You know, you're so much higher than that, and we should act that way, or at least try to. You know, just always in the form of a question. Ask the judge. Say, listen, sir, I never call them your honor. I'm with Gordy on that. I don't stand when they ask me to stand. I don't cross the bar. You know, just say, listen, sir, would you be able to provide me with a copy of your bond certificate? Because if I need to know who I'm doing business with, as I am the executor and beneficiary in all matters pertaining to this situation. You know, that'll make them very angry, by the way, if you state that. And like the woman said, how do you know you're the beneficiary? The minute the handcuffs go on, you know you're the beneficiary, right? Because all that's left is the trustee, which is the one they're hoping you're going to play that role, so they can assign the debt and all the slavery and all the fraud to you, so you pay. So not only are they getting paid out of their trust, but they're also getting paid in as far as fines that they levy against the person, right? So they're getting paid twice if people are stupid enough to pay, to admit to be the person, first of all, but second of all, to agree to have it taken from their trust or to pay a fine, right? And all these things are very confusing, but it goes right back to the birth certificate fraud, where your identity was stolen. And not only that, it was not only stolen, but it was taken and reused in a form that made it look as if it was legit and the same as your given name, but in all actuality, it's a whole different monster. It's basically their attempt to turn your flesh and blood vessel, your living soul, into a corporation, into a piece of paper that they have leverage and rights on. So another thing you can say to the judges: are you trying to administer rights in this affair where you have no rights? You know, you just keep asking the questions.
Yeah. So one thing that's really important before we get started, I got a bunch of stuff written down, and I'll go through the big diatribe, a couple minutes long diatribe that I had written up for my own court proceedings. But one thing people really have to know right out of the gate: when you walk into them buildings, they're not public courthouses. That's a fact. They're private corporations. Clearfield Doctrine clearly states that. That means it's a corporate building, and that means there's corporate policy in place. So when they have these rules, they have the ability to put these rules in place, corporate policy, because it is their building. They don't tell you that it's not a public forum, that it's not a public building, because of course they got to try to not let the, open Pandora's box, so to speak, because once you let the cat out of the box, you're not going to get it back in, right? So they are not public buildings. They're not public courthouses. That is a fact. They can call them that all they want, but that is fraud. That's not true. They're private, for-profit commercial enterprises. And so the reason I'm going to bring that up, and I'm going to talk about one thing before I'll read off the little thing that I wrote for my court. Crow knows about this, but when not every court, but a lot of the courts that I've been in, particularly in Ontario, and I believe even the one that we went in Cape Breton that time, if you remember, Sean, they have the security gates where you have to empty your pockets and you have to walk through. But if you notice, if anybody pays attention to that scenario, you're emptying your pockets and you're walking through and it's all about safety because it's always for your safety, right? But so you don't have weapons or whatever the case may be, whatever bullshit diatribe they try to put out there. But nonetheless, while that's taking place, all the judges or the men acting as judges, women acting as judges, the lawyers, the police with weapons on them at the time, they're all walking through the side. They're not going through these security gates. So right away, there's two things that are happening in that instance. One is, just let me find it here. One of the situations that they're there, it is here. So you could just say like, I would like to state for the record that your corporate policy, and it don't matter if they get angry about what you're saying, you have the right to speak the truth. So I would like to state for the record that your corporate policy of having me go through the metal detectors upon entering your private building is a discriminatory policy, as the lawyers, judges, and police are not held to the same standard. And given that all are entitled to equal protection under the law, this private corporate policy is in direct violation of international law and human rights. And also, I will add that I rescind the implied contract by going through these detectors that I have given up my presumption of innocence. Because that's what they're doing. When they get you to go through there, it's
Right.
a corporate policy. And the trick is it's a, tacit, implied, it's just a quiet adhesion contract that you're not aware of, that you're giving up by accepting their policy of walking through them gates. You're giving up your rights, and you're basically giving up your right to be presumed innocent. So you went through the gates, you're not even in the courtroom, and that you already have given up your right to not be presumed innocent. So if you leave that on the table without rescinding it or rebutting it, in fact, then it's going to stand as truth. So that's why that statement is important to be made. So with that, I'm going to I'll go through the little thing that I wrote when I went to court. And I was lucky enough, I had my preparation pretty good. So I'll go through the whole detail of it for you guys. And I was lucky enough that it was a night court. And there was a prosecutor there that probably didn't know what the hell she was doing, to be honest. So I served my documents to her, and she accepted my documents. That's usually one of the difficult things going into these proceedings, is for them to accept your documents. But she did, unaware of what she was accepting. So going into court, I was going to be in good standing because she had already accepted my documents, which included my my live birth, my fee schedule, all of that kind of stuff. It's as it turned out, the charging officer never showed up to court, so there never ended up being a case brought forward. So I didn't go through the whole diatribe in the court, which in hindsight I should have anyway. But as we were talking last night, that played perfectly into their hands, because during the conversation when the event took place, the officer knew full well that he was not going to be able to get any kind of guilty verdict against me based on the conversation we had and him knowing that we knew what we were talking about. So I think he didn't show up on purpose because he knew that, and he was going to be challenged on the stand. And by all means, even though he didn't show up, if I chose not to drive the 6 hours to go and show up, then I would have been guilty, regardless if he was there or not. So the only thing that saved it was the fact that I was willing to fight it and I showed up, and then he didn't. So there was no evidence brought forward, and the case was dropped, and it was $2,600 in fines, insurance, and licensing, and so on and so forth, registration. So anyway, when I went to that, this is what I had written down, and you guys can, watch this video, slow it down and write things down, take your notes. That's what I would advise you to do. But starting out, I said, I, Gordon James of the Clanberry, am here by special appearance to call for a court of record to resolve this matter. I do not authorize any withdrawals from my trust to pay for these proceedings. I come before this court found to be living, of a full age, and competent to handle my own affairs. As per Article 6 of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Article 16 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, I waive my rights to be seen as a legal person. Now that's important, and we'll touch on why that's important in a moment. Let's see here. Yeah, I got them. So I also then I went ahead and we talked about this a few times, assumptions and presumptions, and I know Sean has done specific video on assumptions and presumptions, but we'll bring it up again. And it's a little bit boring because you have to repeat a lot of stuff, but there's 12. There's 12 that we know of, and then of course there's unknown. So you have to challenge these in court. You have to rebut these in court, either out loud or by affidavit. If they're not rebutted, they're going to stand as truth and they're going to use them against you. So I, Gordon Berry, the undersigned, formally challenge the presumption of public record, as it is by definition presumption, and has no standing or merit in presentable or material fact. I, Gordon Berry, the undersigned, formally challenge the presumption of public service, as it is by definition a presumption and has no standing or merit in presentable material fact. I, Gordon Berry, the undersigned, formally challenge the presumption of public oath, as it is by definition a presumption and has no standing or merit in presentable fact. I, Gordon Berry, the undersigned, formally challenge the presumption of immunity, as it is by definition a presumption and has no standing or merit in presentable or material fact. I, Gordon Berry, the undersigned, formally challenge the presumption of summons, as it is by definition a presumption and has no standing or merit in presentable or material fact. I, Gordon Berry, the undersigned, formally challenge the presumption of custody, as it is by definition a presumption and has no standing or merit in presentable or material fact. I, Gordon Berry, the undersigned, formally challenge the presumption of court of guardians, as it is by definition a presumption and has no standing or merit in presentable or material fact. I, Gordon Berry, undersigned, formally challenge the presumption of court of trustees, as it is by definition a presumption and has no standing or merit in presentable or material fact. I, Gordon Berry, the undersigned, formally challenge the presumption of government, as it is by definition a presumption and has no standing or merit in presentable or material fact. I, Gordon Berry, the undersigned, formally challenge the presumption of agent and agency, as it is by definition a presumption and has no standing or merit in presentable or material fact. I, Gordon Berry, the undersigned, formally challenge the presumption of incompetence, as it is by definition presumption and has no standing or merit in presentable or material fact. I, Gordon Berry, the undersigned, formally challenge the presumption of guilt, as it is by definition a presumption and has no standing or merit in presentable or material fact. I, Gordon Berry, the undersigned, formally challenge all presumptions of law, as I have formally challenged all of the 12 presumptions of law. Then the presumptions of law formally have no substance in material fact. So all unknown or known. And I printed this document out, and I also signed it in red, as you can see here. So that document was passed into the court. So then when I went in there, and I'm not trying to complicate this because what we're going to do tonight is simplify things a little bit for you, but I want to give you the gist of what I did that time. So in closing, I state, I, Gordon James of the Clanberry, being a living man and the highest authority in this court, require all charges to be dissolved immediately. And there is a reason why I chose the term dissolved as opposed to dismissed. And I'll let Crow speak to that when I finish reading this little bit. So you'll find in my document package that I gave you Exhibit 1, a certified copy of my live birth record proving that I am the living man, not the dead fiction. Exhibit 2, a copy of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, where I highlight it on page 3, Article 6. Exhibit 3, a copy of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, where I highlight it on page 10, Article 16. Exhibit 4, handwritten copies of my challenge to the 12 presumptions, to the 12 named and all other presumptions of law, autographed, signed by the living man in red at the bottom right of the page. Exhibit 5, a copy of my fee schedule for your information so you are aware, again, autographed by the living man in red at the bottom right of the page. A copy of Form 8300 that I will require you to fill out if you choose to attempt to continue this financial transaction. I will also need for you to provide me with your W-9 so I can be sure the proper taxes are paid. And Exhibit 7, and the final one, was a notice of fair warning and claim against the man acting as a Crown prosecutor which I am willing to waive if these matters are dissolved immediately as I have demanded. So that's what I did, and I have my fee schedule again. This is my fee schedule that I had drawn up. It's whatever you decide. That's how it works. You make up the rules. You're the living being. You're the one that's in charge of your world. And then at that point, so basically what I told them was if they were willing, if they were going to continue with this matter, then my fee schedule was going to be enacted immediately, and I was going to start charging them fees. Now it becomes another issue when you're starting to get the fees paid. But the idea being is that you want them to know that what they're doing is a big game and it's a ruse, and they're trying to take advantage of you and administer rights when they don't have the ability to do so. And oftentimes, once they realize you know what you're doing, they don't have time to mess with you. As Crow talks about a lot, they're going to spend their energy on the low-hanging fruit, and they're just going to send you on your way. Particularly in these situations, particularly with traffic issues, because there's no victim, provided you never had an accident and caused harm. Any traffic violation, it's all crap. There's no victim, so there's no crime. That is simply a maxim of law. They can't deny that. So they're just going to get rid of you. They're going to send you on your way and get rid of you, and they're going to move on to the ones that are going to just follow the rules. The one thing that I wanted to do, and I would have done if I had the opportunity, was when you get to the situation where you really upset the judge and they leave the room. Now we go into the maxim of law. First one that leaves the battlefield loses. And if that had happened, then I had planned for this. If that had happened, I would have, at that point in time, you have to claim the court as your own. So I would have claimed the court as my own. I would have stated the maxim of law. The judge have left the battlefield. Therefore, he loses. I demand that all charges against me be dissolved. And I would have taken it to another step. And I would have demanded that all charges against everybody there that evening be dissolved at the same time. And I would have told them to let everybody else go free. But I didn't get the opportunity because the cop didn't show up. So, Sean, you can pick up on that. And I know you probably got a couple thoughts on that before we move on.
No, just this comment here. I want you to look at that and explain to this gentleman or woman or lady or whomever you may be what we do in this circumstance here.
Yeah, well, so that's correct. Ideally you can serve papers and you can just not speak and serve papers. But for some people, that's going to make things a little bit more difficult. And keep in mind, when I went to court, I did exactly that. All of those things that I read to you, all them documents, I had 4 or 5 copies prior to even going in court while we were waiting for the court to begin. I served all of them documents to them. And for me, on that evening,
super important, guys. You got to get your documents into the clerk. If you don't, you're in a lot of trouble. You got to have it all in writing. It all has to be in there. And if they go on with this nonsense of, well, we can't take your documents because they're not in the standard format nonsense, then you stick to your guns. You say, listen, these are my documents. I am the sovereign in the matter. I am the supreme one in this courthouse. You will take these documents because there will be no other forms given. Make sure that they take those forms. They got to have them.
All documents served.
Also,
documents served.
Make sure it says on them. Make sure it says clearly on all your documentation that this is a matter of public record. That's super important. You got to have that on there.
So what I was going to say too is I did serve all my documents for the answer to that question, but in that situation and that evening, I had been preparing myself for a long period of time, and I was more than comfortable standing up and orating that whole message myself too. My documents had already been served, so I can also speak to that. Legal advice, I wouldn't say we're giving anybody legal advice, because if you understand the dynamic of what we're talking about, I'm going to separate this, because a lot of people use that and they always want to make that mention that this isn't legal advice. But what we're speaking to has nothing to do with legal. What we're speaking to is lawful. And that's one of the traps that they try to get you in these court proceedings. We're not speaking legal, because legalese is a foreign language, and we aren't fluent in that foreign language. So I'm not giving you legal advice. I'm not offering you legal advice. I'm offering you lawful advice. I'm not trying to practice law. That's another thing that they try to do. You get these law societies that'll try to challenge you as somebody that doesn't have a bar license, so you cannot practice law. Well, I would say when they say that, when they bring that up, and I believe Carl does this, but I'd be more than happy to bring the law into this court, because as it stands right now, there is no law in this court.
Yes.
Legal is not lawful.
Let me bring the
Legal,
law
actually,
into
the
court.
definition, right? So the actual definition of legal is the undoing of God's law. So no, this isn't legal advice. You can say this is lawful advice, or this is just friends helping friends, whatever you want to call it. But I'm not going to get trapped into that diatribe, that's for sure.
Problem is, Michael, you're speaking about, U.S. Constitution. We don't go by that in Canada here. We don't have a constitution in Canada. Irregardless of what a lot of people think that we have one, we don't. Those that know.
Yeah, and I still think they'll challenge the fact that you can practice law based on the Constitution, even if you don't, without having a bar license. I think that there's going to be courts that are going to challenge that, even in the U.S., because that's the whole point of the Bar Society, to give them the authority to be the only ones to practice law. But as we know, there's no law in them courts. It's legal. There's a few things that are real simple. It'll depend on the answers. That's why this is fluid, and you kind of got to have a pretty good idea of everything. But you can go into court, for example, and you can say, simply just ask the man or woman acting as adjudicator, is this court bound by the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights? And if by chance they tell you it is, then you've already won, because at that point, that's when you can waive your right to be seen as a legal person, as per Article 6 and Article 16. And once you waive your right to be seen as a legal person, they now know that they can't contract with you. They can't contract with the living. They can only contract with the legal person. So when you waive that right, that's it, that's all. But that's dependent on how they answer the question.
Yeah. No, 100%. The other thing I was going to say is, you got to remember, guys, the Clearfield Doctrine clearly states that these courts are nothing more than a corporation. Okay, so if you want to get technical about it, corporations don't have the right to practice law either. Okay, they don't. The judge, the adjudicator in the matter, does not have the authority to claim sovereignty, first of all, because they don't have any land titles. There's no land titles in Canada whatsoever at all. No valid ones anyway. It goes right back to what I was speaking about. Diefenbaker, was it Diefenbaker? No, Mackenzie King, who actually wrote a writ, right? And those of you that know about writs and whatnot, is that the only people that have the authority to write writs are the governor generals, the legitimate ones, one in the UK, and possibly the one in Canada before 1931, before December 12th, 1931. So he wrote a writ. He in no way, shape, or form was he ever able to write a writ. That was fraud right at the instant it was signed or written. It was just the sheer fact that people are ignorant. Sorry, but they're ignorant of the fact of what it really is, that he got away with it. It's the same system that's been going on since December 12th, 1931, Statute of Westminster. Illegitimate de facto in every way. The Governor General is now a position. It is a commission without authority. It even clearly says it in there, without authority. So they're supposed to get their right to govern by the contracts to the land. That's what gives them the sovereignty. First of all, there's no monarch in Canada. Okay. There's a monarch in Great Britain, but there's no monarchy in Canada. There's no throne in Canada. All right. They like to call themselves the crown, but there is no crown in Canada. That's talking about the crown of Great Britain. They separated from us, man. They split. They said, adios, amigos. We're out of here. We're going to regulate you guys back to the status of sovereign. Every single province and territory in Canada has been sovereign since December 12th, 1931. That is a fact. That's not my opinion. That's a fact. If you haven't seen that movie yet, go watch The Illusion is Canada. Go watch that movie in depth. It really spells it out right there. Everything is de facto. It's complete fraud. All it is businesses trying to intimidate and coerce and use fear tactics and terrorism, because any matter of force brought against a civil matter is terrorism by its own definition. That's what it is. And according to their own criminal code, it's all punishable by decades in prison. All of it. But they break the criminal code 1,000 times a day and nobody ever holds them accountable or responsible. Right? It's all assumptions and presumptions. That's why it's critically important to have those assumptions and presumptions either verbally expressed or preferably written and verbally expressed, because they have to know right from the very get-go, okay, that you are the executor in the position and the beneficiary. You are not there as a trustee, and also that you know the assumptions and presumptions that they're operating under, right? Because one of those assumptions and presumptions is that you're guilty, no matter whether you enter a plea of guilty, a plea of non-guilty, or don't enter a plea. You're still guilty. That's what you got to understand or stand under or comprehend, is that that's the truth of it. You're guilty when you walk in there. Just by you being physically in that building, they're presuming something about you. And most people, 99% of the people don't know what that is. And that's why we're doing this channel. This is why we're talking about law and talking about the things that we're learning. And we still learn all the time. Gordy and I don't know everything, but we know a fair amount. But in the end of the day, it's all fraud, guys. It boils down to one simple fact. And I tried pointing this out to some people in the last video about the Barron affidavit. The fact is this. It's simple. Produce a contract with wedding signatures, mine and theirs, both parties, both men, both women, or whomever, because remember, corporations cannot contract with flesh and blood man or woman. They can't do it. It's not possible. It's like a triangle trying to go into a circle. It doesn't work. It doesn't fit together. Produce a contract with wedding signatures, okay, a valid contract, or go away. Because no contract in law equals no authority, and it also equals no obligation. Zero. That is a fact. That's not my opinion. Anyway, I'll get off my high horse now and let Gordy talk.
A couple things, and then I'm going to touch. I wrote some stuff about the Clearfield Doctrine that I'm going to give you guys too. So, first of all, you're never going to plead anything. You're not going to plead guilty. You're not going to plead friggin' innocent. You're not going to plead. If you're pleading, you're begging. And you're not going to go in there claiming to be the authority in the court and then beg the court. That's a given. You never plead, period. End of story, end of discussion. Never offer a plea. Second to that, one thing I want to clarify, there was a gentleman, and I'm going to send this to Crow so he can review it and he can look at it. But I've said this the whole entire time, and I know he's the same way. I don't share this information. And I'm a little leery sometimes of sharing information, but I'm not doing this to help criminals. The fact remains in my mind, if you're a criminal and there's a victim and you cause harm to another individual, another man, another woman, another child, another whatever, then you deserve punishment on some level or another. So I'm not here to help people. I'm not here to help people that are actually criminals. What this is all about is these bullshit motor vehicle acts and things that they're charging you, and all that is commerce. They're creating commerce and taking money out of your pocket, paying these fines for licensing and this and that, and even insurance. I know that's a touchy issue because, if you're not having it and you have an accident, you cause harm, and then those people aren't going to get paid. So that was a big stepping stone for us when we were looking at Common Law Court of Canada as well. But bottom line is, I'm not here to help people that are criminals. I'm here to help people that need to be helped and are getting railroaded by the system. The reason I mention that, and I think the guy's already flawed his whole scenario, is just today I seen there's a gentleman in the west of Canada, and he got arrested for possession of fentanyl for the purposes of trafficking, having a stolen weapon, a sawed-off shotgun that he apparently stole. So automatically there is a victim there. Someone had their property stolen from them. And charges like that, pretty severe stuff. So he is actually, on some level, he thinks he's going to challenge this on a sovereign basis. Well, first of all, he's not sovereign, because I highly doubt he owns his property clear of any title with the alloidial title. I highly doubt that. So he's not sovereign, so he's already lost. Second to that is he's adding into his claim of the courts having no contracts or jurisdiction over him, and he's rebuting their jurisdiction based on the lack of contract. That may be sound, but even within that statement of claim, he also talks about having his rights violated from Section 7 through 11 of the Charter. So once he talked about the Charter and brought the Charter into play, he's already acquiescing authority to the system because the Charter has no standing. So I think that guy is going to end up making a bit of a mess out of what we talk about. And it's just done, I think, to add the confusion to people that you can't win. As we talked about before, you do not win in the normal definition of winning in these proceedings this way. What ends up happening is the cases are dismissed or dissolved and they never go on record. There's no precedence. Their common law precedence is never set. The case just disappears because you outsmart at the system and they leave you alone and they go mess with the low-hanging fruit. So with all that, I'm just going to read what I read up about the Clearfield Doctrine. And this is a statement that you can make in the courts. That's why I wrote it this way. So being as all courts were dissolved in 2008 under the Clearfield Doctrine, and then became registered as companies on Dun & Bradstreet, when governments enter the world of commerce, they are subject to the same burdens as any other private firm or corporation. So under the Clearfield Doctrine, the courts are no longer government entities in that they are demanding private monies and must have a contract with me to compel performance. Governments create and enforce civil laws, known as statutes, acts, and legislation, which are created by the Bar Association, and thus they are duty-bound to comply with the law of contracts. The law of contracts requires signed, written agreements by both parties, inclusive of full transparency of all duties and obligations and purpose of said contracts. So based on fact and support it, now this is important too, I think, by bringing precedence into these court proceedings, because that's what they seem to base everything on. It's not the arguments that you're making, it's the precedents that you can bring to back up your arguments. So based on fact and supported by precedent-setting case Clearfield Trust Company versus United States 318, U.S. 363 to 371, 1942. Whereas defined pursuant to the Supreme Court annotated statute of the same, governments descend to the level of mere private corporations and take on characteristics of a mere private citizen, where private corporate commercial paper, Federal Reserve notes, or in Canada, Bank of Canada notes, and securities is concerned. Therefore, when private commercial paper is used by corporate government, then the government loses its sovereignty status and becomes no different than a mere private corporation. As such, government then becomes duty-bound by the rules and laws that govern private corporations, which means that if you intend to compel me to some specific performance based upon your corporate statutes or corporation rules, then you must be the holder in due course of the contract between this court and myself. Thus, you must enter this contract or commercial agreement into evidence before trying to enforce your claims. So that's telling them that they have to have a contract to even continue with this negotiation and this securities arrangement, and they have to prove that they have the contract, as Sean mentioned, and you deserve to have a copy of that contract. And as he touched on earlier, when it talks about the sovereignty in Canada specifically, not so much in the U.S., and before I turn it back to Sean, I'll touch on the U.S. piece, but in Canada, there is no sovereignty by any federal government. And in fact, there's no sovereignty by any provincial government based on the fact that there's no constitutions. Provincial governments, the land claim, the people own the land, not the government. Canadian government does not own any land that it sets its buildings on. It's all leased from the city of Ottawa or the province of Ontario through the treaties that they've got. And the treaties only ever said that they have the right to use the land. They don't own it. So without owning it, they're not sovereign. The difference between Canada and the United States is, and I talked about this before, Section 1, Article 7, Chapter 18 of the U.S. Constitution, it's called the Enclave Clause. They wrote this in the very beginning. They gave 10 square kilometers of property to the federal government. the United States federal government. That gave the sovereignty to the United States federal government. That gave them the ability to override the Constitution whenever they decide to. So they have that in the US. We don't have it in Canada. So they don't have any sovereign status whatsoever.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Sasquatch Brett. If you believe you're sovereign, why plead?
100%.
Right? Why beg? If you're the sovereign one and the true sovereign in the room, then you don't need to beg. They should be begging you, as a matter of fact. That's how that should work.
Right.
At the end of the day, guys, we don't claim to have all the answers.
Let's say the pleading. I know we get this delay and it's hard sometimes, so we overspeak each other. So we apologize, guys. But in the pleading format is another one of these tacit implied tricks that you don't know in your mind, right? Like when because they know when you go in there and plead, whether you even plead not guilty, they already know that you're giving them authority over you by pleading. Most people think that you're going in there and you're doing what you're supposed to do, but that's not the case. It's another implied contract on a subconscious level, a presumption and assumption that they're using against you. So you never plead, ever, 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 ever plead.
And as I pointed out earlier, one of the maxims is that you're assumed to be guilty, whether you plead, don't plead, or, you know, it doesn't matter to them. They're assuming and presuming that you're guilty. They're also assuming and presuming that you're an idiot. You're an idiot to the law society, and you're not fit as a human being, which equals monster. You're not fit as a monster to plead your own case. This is why Gordy said in his opening ramble there, one of the assumptions and presumptions is that he's of sound body and sound mind, capable of administering his own affairs, right? This was the whole reason for that whole thing in the beginning there.
Right. That's what happens. So when like and what Sean's talking about, when you walk in there, they automatically are looking at you like a minor, meaning you're a child. They automatically look at you like you're incompetent, mentally incompetent. And if you don't make that statement to clarify the fact that that's not true, and they also look at you like you're that dead fiction, that corporate fiction that they created with the birth certificate. They don't look at you as a living man. So that's why the statement, I come before this court, found to be living, of a full age, and competent to handle my own affairs. That clarifies all of them issues. They can't have that presumption no more because you made it clear and you made that statement. That's why I think making the statements is good, right? Like not authorizing withdrawals from your trust to pay for the proceedings. Well, now what are they going to do about that? You have to authorize this, right? Asking for a court of record to resolve this matter. You know, like Sean says it all the time, you know, okay, so I'm here to settle all debts. Will the man and woman, the victim, please come forward and let's clarify the statement? And that's his thing. So I'll let him talk about that. But that's one of the statements that he makes a lot.
See, this is me with my checkbook writing a check to the injured party known as the Highway Safety Act, right? Because I violated some act or statute which doesn't apply to flesh and blood. It only applies to persons, right? So is Mr. or Mrs. Act or statute or Mr. or Mrs. Section 37B of the Motor Vehicle Act going to come forward and attest to the fact that I caused them harm or I did damage to their person? Right? Never. You're never going to see it. I've yet to see Mr. or Mrs. Act or statute stand up as a flesh and blood living man or woman. Right? So who's the victim? There's no victim. There is no crime. We've said it 18,000 times. We'll probably say it another 20,000 times tonight. If there's no victim, there's no crime. What have you done? Like Carl Lentz said, the guy tried bunging him for speeding, and he goes, it's my right to go 100 miles an hour backwards with my hair on fire if I like, provided I don't harm another living human, flesh and blood man or woman. There's been no crime committed, right? It might not be wise, or it may not be sensible, and it may not be even moral, but if there's no victim, right? So all this boils down to the fact that we know that it's commercial, the courts, is that if they're all administrative, right? Administrative means to administrate. It means to hand over actions and vessels that can be accepted as value, much like a bank does, right? Because your signature is very valuable. Your autograph is very valuable, right? Don't think it isn't for a second, because it is. It's a very valuable instrument, and they know that 100%. All those places are just places of business. All that goes on in there is commerce, right? They're not there for justice. There's no justice. Are you guys kidding me? You're watching too much Law and Order if you think there's actual justice that goes on in the courts. There is no justice in there. Not for you and I. There might be for the billionaire that owns has 1,000 government contracts and owns 1,000 different companies. And if he pays his lawyer to represent him from a dead fiction to a living thing in the court, maybe there's some justice there. But I don't know too many millionaires. I don't even know too many thousandaires these days, guys.
Yeah. Yeah, I make statements like, so one thing you can do is ask the judge to recite his oath, and they might get upset about that, but that's your right to have them recite their oath. When Sean was talking about, a copy of their bond, well, that's another right that you have. Request it. Don't let them bully you. Request that, one statement you can make right out of the gate, like, okay, so you're sitting in the gallery. Here's one thing for sure. You're sitting in the gallery and they call your name. Okay, so you cannot stand up and they'll call it again or whatever. But at some point in time, you're going to have to recognize that. But it's the way you recognize it. So right away, and I did this in Cape Breton, he called my name and I didn't stand up. And it was going through like alphabetical order. And there was like seven police officers there and a big giant sheriff, and they were just glaring at us because we didn't stand,
Boy, we ever get the dirty eye from those guys.
Yeah. And then finally, I eventually stand up and I'm still in the gallery at this point, because you don't ever cross the bar, that invisible line, because once you cross that, you again step into their jurisdiction. It's a presumption. It's something that's unconscious. You're not aware of it. Stay in the gallery. Don't cross that. They can't force you to cross that. Don't cross that. Stay your piece from where you're standing. But anyway, I stood up, and at that point in time, I just simply said, so I said, there's no evidence being brought forward against me here tonight, so I'm just going to tell you that all charges are going to have to be dissolved. And then he looked at the prosecutor, and of course, she stands up and she says, oh, yeah, blah, 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 whatever. And then that was it. That was the simpleness of it. But I didn't recognize his authority. We didn't stand when he came into the courtroom. We sat there and we were getting the glaring eyes, and they wanted to come over and probably rough us up, or think they wanted to rough us up. But I think probably because we look like a couple biker dudes, they probably thought maybe that wasn't the best case scenario at the time. So they chose not to do that. But one thing you can do, stand right up. I am Gordy. I'm the living man, and I'm separate from the corporate fiction of the all caps name that's created by the state. And I'm not going to claim the all caps name that's created by the state, because now you're trying to get me to commit a crime. Because by claiming the all caps name that's created by the state, that is fraud. That's not my creation. I can't claim ownership of that because I did not create it. So they're again trying to trap you into a fraud. So you cannot claim the name on the document, on the birth certificate, on any of these things. The all caps name is not yours. Do not claim it. That constitutes fraud. And if they push you, then just ask the question: would I not be committing fraud by claiming something that's not my creation? And then see how they answer. Because all we're trying to do is put the pressure on them and take the pressure off of you. That's the key to all of this whole thing. Now, the Ontario Court of Justice, for those of you in Ontario, their DUNS number is 204-888-192 or 129. Sorry, that proves they're a registered corporation with Dun & Bradstreet. And if, as a corporation, they need contracts to do business. Furthermore, as a corporation, that means the adjudicator, the man or woman acting as a judge or justice of the peace, is nothing more than employee of said corporation. So beyond the fact that corporations can't practice law, this is just an employee of a corporation. Where does he derive his authority to practice law or administer rights over you? And on administration of rights, we said this many times. I've told lots of people this. Someone that's trying to administer rights over something or someone that they do not own is in fact slavery. So if they're going to if they're attempting to administer rights, and this is where Sean talks about, show me the contract. If they're attempting to administer rights over you, then now it's the onus is on them to provide proof of contract, or that means they're claiming to own you, the individual, the man or the woman. So where is the proof of purchase that you purchased me?
Yeah, I want to see that slave contract, and I have the right to look at it, and I have a right to offer a counter contract. I have the right to do a number of things, and I'm not talking about the rights that people gave up to turn them into privileges. I'm talking about your real rights. You know, the unalienable ones, the ones you're born with. They can't be turned into a government privilege with a stroke of some guy's pen. I don't know who this guy is with the pen. The man, that's some magical pen, isn't it? It duped the entire world, that pen. I'd love to get a hold of that pen, to be honest with you. You know, you change some things with that pen in a hurry. Just because they wrote something on a piece of paper, it magically applies to the baby that's popping out of their mama somehow. Amazing, guys. Totally amazing. Somebody should write a book on that. Oh, they did. It's called How to Commit Fraud on Your Fellow Man. That's what it's called, the book. And unfortunately, we've all been forced to read it through the TV and through the radio and through the internet and through everything else over the last number of years you've been alive, right? I'm telling you guys, you question everything. Don't take anything, even what we're telling you here tonight, at face value. Go do your own research. And I don't mean someone else's opinion that took you 5 seconds to find. I mean, go look at these documents and start picking through them. Yeah, I know it takes some time of your life to do it. Trust me, we know all about it. It does take time out to do all these things, but you're going to be rewarded so greatly by taking the time to dig through some of this and dissect it. And if you have questions, ask. We may not know the answer. In fact, we probably won't, but we might know somebody that does know the answer. Or we may figure it out, which is where a lot of what Gordy and I know about law is come from. We both study it. We both studied it. We get ideas from each other. We go look up things. I don't know if you want to talk about it, Gordy, but we found an interesting thing on your certificate that we were talking about the other night. You may not want to even mention that, but
no,
you know,
I don't
it's just.
I don't mind, because I think it's going to be a key play in this whole moving forward with this. And I gotta do something with that and look into it deeper. But I think the key is asking questions. You have the right to ask whatever question you want. Like, so another question, is it not true that in Canada specifically, is it not true that these acts and statutes, because that's what the judge said in the case that I was in, when I asked him about being bound by the declarations, he told me that he wasn't. He was bound by statutes and criminal code. So the question is it not true that these acts and statutes only apply to public employees? Because that's the truth. They only apply to them. They don't apply to you as a living man, right? So you ask the question. And if you don't know, it's okay that you don't know, but you have the right to ask the question. You know, another question is like, you know, when you want to talk about the Dun & Bradstreet number in the Court of Justice, you can look these up for yourself in whatever location you're at, by the way. But can you explain then why the entire Ontario Court of Justice is registered with Dun & Bradstreet and the registration number, you know, and ask him that. And then what is he going to say? You know, he's going to be all, you know, knocked back, right? Then ask him, does that mean that you are actually just an employee of that said corporation and therefore you have no true lawful ability to practice or administer what you call law? Ask the questions. They're going to get upset. I know they're going to get upset, but the only reason they're going to get upset, take that as a win, because you're beating them. You're frustrating them. That's why they're going to get upset. The Black's Law is a good thing too. First thing you can do when you walk into court, before we start these proceedings, and I know Sean has said this many, many times, can you please tell me which dictionary we're operating from here today? Is it the Black's Law Dictionary or is it the Oxford English Dictionary? Because I need to know what language we're speaking. You know, because I don't speak legalese and that's a foreign language. That really rattles their cages.
They don't like
that. It's a fair question. And then, as we were talking last night, another thing that they do to people is when you're starting to rattle their cages and upset them because you're pulling things out that they're not prepared to deal with, and they know you're seeing through the illusion, what they do, okay, they get the bailiffs. The bailiffs are going to come over and they're going to put you in the hoosegow for 20 minutes or a half an hour, try to cool you off. Well, really, they're trying to break your spirit and they're trying to get you back into their jurisdiction. How I would personally deal with that, I'm not going to fight them. I'm not going to wrestle and I'm not going to defend. I'm just going to plain out state to the court, first of all, that you now are administering rights over me and you have not proven any contract exists that you have ownership over me, that is slavery. I want that on the record. And I will repeat that same statement to the bailiff that's walking over to put me in cuffs and take me downstairs. You realize that what you're doing right now is committing slavery, because I know for a fact that you have no contract over me or purchase agreement that you own me. So you should be careful. Doesn't mean they're not going to put you downstairs. And then if they continue on with that, you can tell the justice or the judge or the man or woman acting as such, I know what you're trying to do here. I know you're trying to break my spirit, and I know you're trying to trick me back into your jurisdiction by getting upset. But I can assure you, sir, or Peter, or John, or Mary, or whatever their name is, if you want to use their personal name, go ahead, that when I come back upstairs, I will remain in the same stance as I am right now, that you and this proceeding has no actual jurisdiction over me, the living being. It will not change anything in my mind. Now, I'll go down and have a nap, and I'll talk to you later. It's very simple, guys. Don't let them scare you. Don't let them intimidate you. Don't let them bully you. And if you want to add to it, then bring up Criminal Code 423. Is it not true now that you're actually breaking the criminal code right now because you're trying to force me into this contract via intimidation or coercion tactics, and that violates Section 423 of the Criminal Code, which does apply to you as a public employee? You have to put the pressure on them. But you also got to be a little bit, be prepared for a little bit of pressure put back on you. It's okay, guys. I mean, all we're trying to do here is try to get people to be a little stronger going in the court. And I'm not saying that everybody's going to go in there with this information and all of a sudden that the world's going to change and they're going to back down from everybody, because they don't want Pandora's box to open, because once it does, it's done. But I know for a fact that more people go in there and start pressuring this system, it's going to break. And it has to break, because that's the only way we can fix this. These jurisdictions, the problem is the jurisdictions are all blended together now. And they call it criminal court when actually it's a civil administration tribunal. It's not a criminal court, all of these things. So we've got to break these things, You can also ask who's bonding the courts, because oftentimes it ends up being the prosecutor that's bonding the proceeding at that moment. They don't like you to know these things, right? Who's bonding this? I would like to see the bond. Just keep pressuring them guys. Oh yeah, so my thing, I almost forgot. So interestingly enough, I was looking at my live birth record, and what they do, you get the live birth record. That's the one that your parents sign with all of your information when you're born at the hospital. That's the actual true document that proves that you're a living being. Not that obviously your present should, but that's a true document that does so. Anyway, your parents write your name down or print your name down on this document, and then the Deputy Registrar General in Canada or the province, they take that document, and then they create the all caps version of that name, and that's how they create the birth certificate. So now they have created that fictional twin, corporate fictional twin of you, that dead fictional twin. Well, interestingly enough, in my case, and I looked at my thing the other night, I was just doing some research and I pulled it out and looked at it, and I never noticed it before. But it appears to me that my parents, my mother and father, when they filled out that document, they gave me my name as all caps. My name is written on my live birth record in all caps. So that means what they've done is they've taken my given name, given to me as a gift from my parents. They've taken the exact same name in the exact same font, all caps, and created this fictional identity. When the fact is now, I believe it changes it for me, because one of the things that we looked into before is taking ownership of the all caps name, or taking control of it, if not ownership. And there was a way that you could do that, and then they started changing the laws because more people are starting to wake up to the fraud. But in my case, and I have to look into this a little more, they basically stolen my name. So I actually do have ownership of the all caps name as it was given to me at birth. Therefore, the trust that they may have created the trust with that fictional identity, but in fact, it belongs to me because the all caps name belongs to me. So I think it's like a gift, I think, and I don't know why that happened. I'm sure my parents, my mother nor father, had any inclination what they were doing, I'm sure they weren't aware writing it down in all caps made a difference. Maybe they did that because it shows up neater in the little blocks that they provide. I don't know. But as we were talking, what I think I'm going to do is, and I'm lucky enough as well that, both of my parents are still alive. My relationship with my mother may be strained, but we still have a relationship. So I think that it's very simple. I can just have them file an affidavit of truth, and they can say that that's what they wrote down, and that's the name that they gave me. So now the people that gave me the all caps name can give an affidavit of true support in the fact that they gave me the all caps name. Now the government, the state that created that fictional fraud, they basically committed theft on me as a newborn child, a newborn man. So maybe that changes it, and it helps break the ice a little bit. Interesting. It's very interesting anyway. I don't know where we go with it, but it's very interesting that that's how it's written out. And Sean, like he said, when we talked about it, his isn't written in all caps when his parents wrote his name down.
And for all those people in New Brunswick that happen to be watching this, New Brunswick's kind of a weird province. They're not allowing people to have access to their certificate of live birth. There is a remedy, though. If you have one or both living parents still alive, you can get an affidavit written up, basically them attesting to your birth, the details of your live birth, and that's considered the same thing in this context. So if you live in New Brunswick and you have a parent that's still alive, get them to attest to the details of your live birth and write it all out in an affidavit form, get them to sign it, you sign it, create a contract, and there you are. You have one now, right? That is the foundation document, guys. That is the one where all the fraud started, right there, right then. They took that given name from your parents, except in Gordy's case, in which case they took the given name and didn't do anything.
I can't hear you, Sean.
No? Can't hear me. Okay. What's going on here? Hang on one sec.
It was rock and roll.
They're going to hear everything you say.
Test. Can you guys hear me in the chat? Hello? Can you guys hear me? Yes, they can. Oh, Phil says he can hear me. Problems on your end there, Gordy. Hang on, guys. Bear with us here.
I got you.
You got me now?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, this is free software, guys. As you've probably noticed, the watermark on it. So just bear with us. But anyway, where were we going with all this? Oh, the certificate of live birth. Yeah, so they've basically taken yours, and they haven't even bothered to even change the spelling or anything. They've just transferred it over to their fraud, right?
Yeah. Same all caps name. It just blew my mind when I seen it. So I don't know. We'll have to look into that and see where we can go with that. But the way I look at it, and the common sense part of it is different. It's not different. Like everybody else's is different, so they can get away with that because they created a fictional identity, but they've basically taken my identity. I don't think that's how that's supposed to work.
No, what they're doing basically is they're taking your given name and they're stealing it from you without you even knowing. They're committing fraud, and they're turning it into an administrative vessel. That's what they're doing. They're trying to link the flesh and blood creation to their fraud, to their personage, to their administrative lives on paper only fraudulent thing, so they can use it to as a securities, basically. Right, that's why it's got the CUSIP number on it. It's got all that stuff attached to it. It's basically you're now chattel for the corporation that they can use to secure lines of credit. They can use for all number of different things, right?
Yeah, it's a debt. Secures a debt. Really, that's what they borrow the money off of our backs, and we're the security of the debt. So they borrow whatever and they secure it on the debt. Your signature is actually a financial instrument in both the United States and Canada. It's a financial instrument, and it's actually in the document saying so. So that's why it's important to tell them in there that you don't authorize any withdrawals from the trust. because that's how they get so wealthy, right? Judges and lawyers are not they're not getting wealthy just based on the money they charge to the people, or the judges, for example, just the wages that they're getting paid from the so-called, the corporation masquerading as a government. They're getting wealthy from all the extra money that they're stealing from people via the trust. You know what I mean? Going back to the Federal Reserve and, opening the window and, oh, we got this signature here. So boom, they get paid this and that. It's a massive fraud, massive amount of fraud. I want to also, I want to bring up too, because this is interesting. And I think most people would comprehend this as well, but I don't put a whole lot of onus into the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights or the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. But when you're in there playing their game, I like to use their stuff against them to a degree, right? So I think in Canada, it's interesting that they say that the courts aren't bound by these documents because we are a member state. And if you read the documents, member states can't act outside of these documents. So being a member state of the UN or whatever the case may be, how is it that our courts are allowed to operate outside of these basic human rights laws? That they're not supposed to. But further to that, if you look at Article 10 in the UN Declaration, and I'm sure there's the same article, I don't know what the number is right off the top of my head, but in the International Covenant, but Article 10 states, everyone is entitled in full equality to a fair and public hearing by, and this is key, by an independent and impartial tribunal in the determination of his rights and obligations and of any criminal charge against him. So I would challenge immediately Article 10 based on the fact that I would raise the issue that this proceeding, this is how I would state this to the court. I would raise the issue that this proceeding does not meet that standard, as we have both the individual acting as the prosecutor and the individual acting as the adjudicator being employees of the same corporation masquerading as a de jure government. That's not impartial. You have the prosecutor and the judge, both employees of the same corporation that are trying to make a claim against you. That is not impartial, not whatsoever. And, they might get upset when you raise that point. But again, what we're trying to do is give you simple questions or statements that you can raise. And the one key that you have to remember going through this, if you're going to talk in court, if you're going to orate in court, I know we've said it before, but you have to keep reiterating this because it's very important. Never answer a question by the normal context of answering a question. If I was to ask you a question, you give me an answer, that's fine. But in court, when you ask a question by the judge or whatever, you can answer the question, but you have to phrase your answer in the form of a question. Because the person that's asking the question is the person that's in the authority. You cannot acquiesce authority by just answering questions. And this, again, is another subconscious tactic that they use to get you into their jurisdiction. And it's very simple. The judge will ask you a question and you're unaware because they're speaking legalese and they're doing this foreign entity shit. And you're just going to answer the question. You think you've done nothing wrong. And then boom, the judge is laughing. I got you. Now you're back in my jurisdiction. Always keep that in your mind. Just a simple little thing. Phrase your answer in the form of a question.
Remember too, guys, that let's just say like the night we were up in Cape Breton there was probably, I don't know, what would you say, Gordy? There was probably 40 or 50 people waiting to be heard in the court there behind us.
Yeah.
Maybe 40.
Night court. And night court at that.
How many of those 40 do you think would have stood up, and what do you think their reaction would have been if they had heard something like this coming out of our mouths in front of the judge? Because nobody ever says this. Hardly anyone talks like that to them. Doesn't stand up when they come in the courtroom. Speaks from a position of authority. Never answers questions. Always asks questions. It would rattle them. They'd for sure want to know more, right? And that's exactly what they don't want. That's why they'll never ever answer you in an affidavit, point for point. Because if they do, in a lot of cases, they're letting the cat out of the bag. And this has been a secret, a well-kept secret. If you guys want to know how much of a secret it is, go read that book, Fruit from a Poisonous Tree by Melvin Stanford. I think you can even download it on the internet on PDF form. Go read that. It says right in there, one of the Rockefellers talking about how if they ever did figure this out, this Ponzi scheme, we have what's called plausible deniability, right? And it talks about it in great detail. I think it's even part of that speech where they talk about how they're poisoning humankind or mankind, how that when they're poisoned and sick and they come to us for help, we'll give them more poison. I think it's part of that whole speech. I think it was one of the Rockefellers. I have to go back and look to be sure, but in any case, no. Every single time you can stand up and have your paperwork in the system beforehand, and stand up and question them and question their authority, that's a win. No matter what the outcome is, that's 100% a win. The more people that do that, you're paving the way. You're a trailblazer. You're paving the way for the ones behind you, right? Whether you want to admit it or not. That's exactly what you're doing, right? Think about that on a grand scale, right?
Yeah. So for some people, you can do this if you want to. If you're just starting to learn some of this stuff and now you're interested in trying to protect yourself and maybe, take care of yourself in the court. I won't use the word represent because that's another one of the terms that they use against us, which actually means represent. They're trying to represent you as the dead fiction, but standing up for yourself, I say, let's say you have a proceeding going forward. It is possible you can go there and then you can just simply state like, I'm in the process of, getting some legal advice, looking at getting a lawyer, whatever. You can say whatever you want to say, but basically you need a continuance of these proceedings. You need to set another date because you're not prepared to deal with this at this moment. Now, if you're well into it, and they might not do that, but oftentimes they're going to grant that to you. They're going to grant that. They're not going to think much of it. Then that's going to give you more time to put your paperwork together. Because if you're going quickly, you haven't had the opportunity to put your paperwork together. You haven't had the opportunity to present your paperwork and get it registered at the courts. Get it submitted. So you're kind of behind the 8 ball. So if you put a delay of proceedings in place and you get that, so now 2 months down the road, you have to go back again. Okay, well that gives you time to get your paperwork in order. That gives you time to take your paperwork to the courts and get it submitted to the courts prior to going into court. And now you're getting into a stronger standing. Now you don't have to do that. I'm just saying that's an option. If you feel like you're going to court next week or tomorrow or whatever the case may be, and you want to do this, then just go in there and just say, look, I'm looking at getting some legal advice. I haven't got everything prepared, and I'm not prepared today. And I'd like to have a continuance in the proceeding so I can deal with this at another date, more prepared. And most time, you don't want to be in there argumentative and confrontational. You always want to try to stay in honor. And that's how they kind of trip you. They want you to get angry. They want you to get upset. They want you to argue and bick. Because once you start getting that way, now your emotions are in charge of your being. And when your emotions are in charge of your being, you tend to not be able to think clearly. And they want that to happen because when you're not thinking clearly, that's when you make mistakes or that's when you say the wrong thing. And that's proven in these proceedings by how the prosecutor will cross-examine witnesses. Because when they cross-examine witnesses, what do? They try to upset them. They try to get them rattled. They try to make them mad. They try to make them say stuff, and they keep picking and digging and digging. And the good, so-called good lawyers or even good defense lawyers, even though they're all fraud, they do the same thing. And they try to break the witness on the stand. And how do they do that? By getting in touch with their emotions and making them angry or upset and all these kind of things. So you could do that to try to get it put off and get your paperwork in order so you can present it. Just another little piece of evidence or advice that might be able to help you.
I want to speak on this comment. Get the magistrate's bond. They must have one to litigate commercial actions for liability. Make the prosecutor submit an affidavit. 100%. You wouldn't happen to know how we get their bond, would you? Because we've been trying like hell to find where their bonds are held so that we can go after their bonds. You wouldn't happen to know. I guess it's different, I guess, for every area, is it? Or how would one go about getting their bond is what I'm asking.
I think maybe we've answered that question without realizing it, in the sense that when you're in the situation and you're in these banks that are operating as courts and you actually request their bond, then by their own rules, whether they abide by them or not, because we know how they play, but by their own rules, They're supposed to give you their bond. So then if of course they give you your bond, now we know how to go after their bond. That's why they don't want to give it to you, because they also know that that's how you're going to get back at them on a financial level by attacking their bond, on not just a financial level, but on a personal level as a private individual, the private man or woman, not the employee of the court or any of that, the actual private individual. That's how you can take their boat, take their house, whatever, when they commit unlawful acts against you.
Listen, the bond is the key. I personally believe that is going to be the thing that's going to flip over the apple cart here, guys, is we get control of their bond and we are actually able to put a lien on their bond. If we do that, they cannot operate. They can't move. It's like it's check and mate in the same stroke is what it is. That bond is that bond is not applicable to their corporate role. Well, it is, because a lot of times the corporations are actually offering those bonds so that they're able to be employed by the corporation. So we have to find out where their bonds are.
It is definitely applicable to the corporate role. That's why all public employees need to be bondable. When you fill out an application for a job as a public employee, you need to be bondable. If you're not bondable, you cannot get that job, because it does apply to that role. It doesn't apply to the individual. It applies to the role, but that's how you get them as a private individual as well, because you're attacking their bond. And I also believe once they're bond, like, they can't do nothing once that's happened. So that means they can't even work. That judge cannot even go to work tomorrow because his bond is in question at this point in time.
They can't do a single thing. They can't even mix up a cup of coffee in the courthouse without it. They can't even be there under any situation or under any capacity. So what we have to do is find out what brokerage house, Kelly, they're held in, because there's a million different ones. And we need to know for the Canadian courts of Ontario, the courts of Nova Scotia, and the courts all across the land mass, known as Canada, where these bonds are held and how we are able to access them. And once we do this once, and the news gets out that you put a lien against their bond, you want to see rats run from a sinking ship, boy, you're going to see it. You're going to see all the holes open up then. That is the key, I think, as far as I know. Yeah, 4 strikes. Yeah, this is valid. 4 strikes on bond, their career ends. That's how powerful it is. Absolutely 100%. I don't even think it takes 4. It's while it's under investigation, as far as I know, they're not able to work.
It freezes them. And that's why they keep it such a secret here. But actually, it's supposed to be public knowledge. I actually believe that you should be able to fill out a FOI request about the bonds. And you should be able to access their bonds via an FOI request. Because I believe the problem is they don't follow their own rules, and we don't have the arm of enforcement. That's always a problem. But when you request it, I believe that they're supposed to give that to you. So in the case of policy enforcers, I've spoken to policy enforcers that are on the right side of this situation now. I've spoken to policy enforcers that have burnt their uniform once they realized the corruption that's going on. Policy enforcers that retired and became a paralegal and actually stepped away from the paralegal world because they realized the corruption of the court situations. But those individuals, they did not know who held their bond. And I believe that case is, the situation is that the corporation of the OPP actually are the ones that put the bonds out for the people. They don't actually know where they come from. So that policy enforcer on the side of the road probably doesn't even know about his bond. He's probably not lying to you. It's probably just put upon him by the corporation, and he's an employee of said corporation. So I would say go directly to the RCMP head office or the OPP head office or Truro Police head office, whatever the case may be in your area.
So my understanding, Don, about how the lien is applied is you're questioning the validity of the bond. You're questioning the bond itself or the actions of the person that's being bonded. So in a series of, like, it's in the bond or the Barron affidavit, a series of 6 letters over the course of 6 weeks. It doesn't have to be 6 weeks. It can be 4 weeks. It's a series of letters. At the very end, you take all those letters with your affidavit of truth, challenging the bond information. You put it all together. You put your stamp on it, your crest on it. You send it out to them. It's now a lien. That's how I think that works. And once that's listed on their bond certificate as there being a lien applied to it or a controversy in law over that paperwork, they can't do anything about it until you remove it or it's been satisfied, one or the other.
right?
That's
And a
my
bond,
understanding of it anyway.
yeah, I agree with that. And I would also add to that a bond is also basically an insurance policy for that person to protect them. So in the sense of it being an insurance policy, now when they have committed an unlawful act against you, then what you're doing is filing a claim to that insurance policy, not unlike you would do if somebody run into your car. You're filing a claim that they committed an unlawful act against you, and you're filing it against your insurance policy, and that puts a bond in question as well. So until it's satisfied that, and then you sign off on the fact that it has been satisfied, then I believe that freezes their ability to perform the tasks that they're supposed to be performing.
Right here, Tasha, this is the whole deal. And this is why we're saying that they don't even follow their own rules of court. Because anytime you request an oath of office, they're bound to give it to you. And if they don't, everything they do, so much as move a pen on their desk after that, is complete fraud. It's fraud anyway beforehand, but it's certainly fraud after that. They're supposed to recuse themselves at that point. You just questioned their oath. You can't operate on two oaths. Remember, I say all the time, Gord, you can't serve two masters. You're either beholden to one and empty of the other. You have to serve one or the other. So you're either operating on one oath or another oath. You can't operate under two oaths at the same time. And that you're right, they do absolutely ignore you. And part of that is our fault because we don't have a arm of enforcement. But that can be rectified if we get enough people together to create our own sheriff's society, our own group of sheriffs, our own courts. Right now, the court is held by the people on the paper. That's where our court is right now. But we have to also have the ability to have it in a physical form as well.
Also, Tasha, don't be frustrated, because even though you requested that, can you flip that back up, Crow? Even though you requested that and you compelled for the oath and the bond, and they've refused you, you have that on record now that you've asked for that. Multiple times you've had that on record that you've asked for that. So now that proves that they're operating unlawfully because they're refusing to provide you with their oath and their bond that allows them to operate to begin with. And then just keep, so you're basically building a path to really deal with these people in the manner that's necessary because they're basically refusing you. And you just keep going. So in your case, if you think the Secretary of the State holds them stateside, then I would recommend that you file an FOI, Freedom of Information request, with the Secretary of State, with that particular individual for their oath of office and their bond. And make sure that you mention in that situation that you've asked for it specifically on an individual basis multiple times, and they've not provided it for you. And you know that they're committing unlawful acts against you, and they're supposed to provide you with that information. It's the same when you have a police officer. I would say it's the same thing. When they can, now they even try to say they don't have to do that. But when you ask them for their badge number and their name, they're supposed to provide that to you. Because how else do we know who they are? How else can we go back and prove that that's who they are? How can we prove that they're bonded as a public employee to work in the role that they're working in? And it's not just a fraud setting up there trying to play a game with you. You have these rights, and they can't take them away from you.
No different than asking a policy enforcer for their badge number, right? So you can do an independent personal check on it at your convenience. You have to know who you're dealing with. Who am I dealing with here? Am I dealing with policy enforcers, or am I dealing with a peace officer? And 99% of the time, you're dealing with a policy enforcer. I don't even know if let's say the RCMP, for instance, here in Canada, have the ability to operate as peace officers anymore. I don't think they do, to be completely honest. I don't think they've operated as a peace officer in a long time. And there is a difference between a policy enforcer and a peace officer. A big difference.
I would say the RCMP.
Harry Smith, thank you very much for joining the channel tonight. I appreciate it, brother.
I would say the RCMP has never operated as peace officers. If you look back at the history of the RCMP, they were brought into action to attack the native population in Canada. So that they've never been peace officers. I don't believe that there is such thing as a peace officer in Canada. or in what they call Canada at the very least. I would say in the United States, when you get into the counties and you have sheriffs and deputies that are voted for and directly accountable to the people, I would say that those people are what you would call peace officers. I know definitely in Canada, what the land that they call Canada, these are policy enforcers because they are corporate employees, and the RCMP, the OPP, every organization that they call a police force in this landmass is in fact a corporate, private, for-profit corporation, registered and Dun and Bradstreet. That in and of itself tells
That's
you
not
for
even
a
up
fact.
for debate, guys.
Right. That tells you for a fact they are not peace officers. They are nothing more than policy enforcers trying to create commerce. That's it. You think about it up here. I don't know what it's like down there, cross border, but you know, we have unmarked vehicles up here all the time that are hiding in behind the bushes or behind a building or a sign. So that to me, that does not look like peace officers. That looks like they're hunting, and they're hunting to create commerce. That's not the job they're supposed to do. You know, if there's a crime to investigate, that's one thing, but you don't hide there. That's no different than building a blind out in the woods to hide from the deer so that we can trick the deer into coming into rifle range so we can hunt them. That's exactly what they're doing. They're pirates, road pirates, period, end of the story. They're not there to keep the peace. They're not there to keep you safe. They're there to protect above them, which again becomes the criminals acting as politicians and the criminals acting in the court proceedings and all of that. And my friend who was a retired police officer, and I won't put out too much information about where and whatever, told me specifically when he was working with the force, he was always the friend of the prosecutor. They always treated him with good regard and much respect and so on and so forth. He'd be the arresting officer, so on and so forth, bringing these people into court, having them charged and this and that. He was always good with them and they always respected him. But as soon as he retired and then he moved on and he's seen the world start collapsing as it is, a Christian man nonetheless, and then he thought, well, maybe I can help some people. So I'm going to do the paralegal scenario here. And I think I can help some people in these courts. Not aware. I used to talk to him a lot about common law, natural law types of things, and really brand new to him. But he was interested and open-minded to listen. And so we had good conversations. But as he went through, going through these proceedings, these administrative tribunals, these securities exchanges that are taking place, he realized himself and told me himself that there is no justice there. People are getting trampled over. Everybody's rights are getting stomped on. Nobody cares about the individual. They make things up as they go along. He got right to the point where he was considering giving up his license as a paralegal because he wasn't able to help people inside of that corrupt system. And then he had a friend talk to him and say, you know, don't do that just yet. Maybe things are going to get righted down the road. You don't know what the future looks like. But at the same point in time, he's basically taking a leave and he's not operating. He's taking a leave of absence, which he's allowed to do within that field for a year. So he didn't have to renew his license or revoke his license. So he still has standing. But this is a man who worked on both sides of the system and sees clearly how corrupt it is. There is no justice in these systems, guys. To the point where he came along to help us in a situation and in a court case coming up against you know, making a move on taking somebody's property and, you know, giving their final judgment on basis of what they're going to get for being in trouble, whether it's going to be time, probation, whatever the case may be. Anyway, he came along to help with that, and the courts actually told him that he was not allowed to help because they were looking at an incarceration time that exceeded 6 months. Now, this is a licensed paralegal trying to help somebody that can't afford the big dollar lawyers, the big dollar bar association frauds, and the courts actually told him he was not allowed to help. It would be in violation of his license, and they would actually make a claim against him and his license because he's not allowed to do that. So at that point, that's when he was saying, like, you know, I can help people without the license, and then they don't hold that license over my head no more, regardless. So that's what we're up against. And that's why we try to share all these different ideas and stuff with people to help you, put the pressure on the system, and hopefully some of you have some success with this. I know for me, I've said it openly many, many times. They will never trap me inside their legal system playing their game with their rules. It will not ever happen. Ever, ever, ever. I will challenge that at every turn. And it doesn't matter to me if they threaten me or they lock me up or any of that. That does not matter. I will not play their game. I bow to no man, that's for sure.
I'm with you there, brother. I'll go down swinging if I have to, but I'm not going to acquiesce to any of that garbage. I don't care about your assumptions and presumptions. I don't care about your tacit agreements and all this other garbage that you use. We can use those cards too, guys. That's part of the power of the affidavit. Affidavit unrebutted. I don't care what anyone says. An affidavit unrebutted, point for point, is the truth in the matter. At the end. That's not my opinion either. That's been supported forever. So people saying that the Barron affidavit doesn't work. Yeah, well, it's worked in the UK, it's worked in other places, and it's been held up as the truth for the last 9 years in the court system. Do you think if it was BS, it wouldn't have held up that long? It would have been gone a week later. So it is valid, and they are very scared of it. They are very worried about it. Don't fool yourself. I've used that exact system to get free of some of the tyrants that were bothering me in my life, and it worked like a charm. But I knew how to administer it. I knew what to do. I knew how to apply the lien. I knew all the steps involved, and they're not difficult. If this guy here can learn it, anybody can. And if you want to know more about that, we can certainly get into that. But we're just trying to put a whole bunch of information into your heads. I feel bad for you if you're new to this channel, if you're new to standing. It's going to seem overwhelming at first, but the further you dig into this, the more information you get, the more tools you get in your toolbox, the easier it gets over time. The more you know how to stand in your truth, how to stand up for yourself. The number one thing is you got to believe it in here. Learn it in here and believe it in here, and then you're basically you're unbeatable at that point. You're a force to be reckoned with, right? You really are, right? And a lot of people that say, "Oh, this doesn't work. You're just going to get yourself locked up doing that." That may be. However, it does work. It's just that people are not willing to take it far enough. They're not willing to go the distance. Remember what I say, stand on your square. They're not going to stand on their square. The first thing they do is they threaten your livelihood, or they threaten something, and you fold, like, excuse the expression, no disrespect meant, but like a Chinese motorcycle. You fold up. You can't be like that. You have to be willing to go the distance. And that comes, I don't know how to tell you guys to prepare to do that. I guess Gordy and I have always been fighters since the day we were born. I certainly had a lot of my setbacks in life, and continue to. I've learned how to use that to my advantage, though. I learned how to be a man in the Army as a young man. I learned how to take care of my own business. I learned how to become self-sufficient in a way, and everybody. It's possible that everybody can do that, but they have to be able to risk something. We're not saying that this stuff doesn't come with a risk. It certainly does. Anytime you stand in their house or you submit paperwork on your behalf, there's a risk involved. There's a risk in everything. There's a risk in leaving your house in the morning. There's a risk in walking across your floor. There's a risk in going up and down stairs. There's risks in everything in life, right?
Yeah, anytime you're challenging the system, you're going to be faced with risk for sure. Type this in the chat too, Crow. There's another case out of the UK that's pretty important. It really makes a difference here in Canada with the monarchy and the scenario with the monarchy. But the case is Regina v. JAH, John Anthony Hill. So that case, a little bit, for those of you that don't know, some may be aware, but basically what that case came down to, the guy was incarcerated, facing, and I forget exactly what he was charged with, but you can look it up. Regina v. JAH, John Anthony Hill. So that's Regina the Queen versus John Anthony Hill. Anyway, this guy did the research, and he goes back to Queen Elizabeth's initial coronation. And her coronation was fraudulent because what she had done was she did her coronation by kneeling on a fake coronation stone. Why is that important? Well, the coronation stone is supposed to it's supposed to be biblical, and that's supposed to be where the monarchy got their authority from God, the creator, whatever you want to be, whatever you want to call it. And the coronation stone was broken. The original coronation stone was broken, and it was off getting repairs at some place. And when she did her coronation, she knelt on a fake stone, which means her coronation was fraudulent, which means she never had the power, authority, or any of that kind of stuff. And that's true. She didn't. There's a whole bunch of other questions about Queen Elizabeth, but he actually presented that case, and his entire case was taken care of. That was it. That's how he won his case, and he walked out of court, and that's on the record in the UK. You can look that up. It's on the record, and that same scenario should work in Canada because all of the Canadian courts and the whole Canadian political system, parliamentary system, Governor General fraud, all of that goes back to the Crown of England, right? So if you can prove that the Crown is fraudulent, then that means everything else from that is fraudulent. Fraud, that's the thing with fraud. Anywhere in the contract, whether it's at the beginning or the end, once fraud it becomes a part of that contract, it vitiates the entire contract. The whole entire contract is invalid at that point. It's gone. So fraud can't continue in fraud. And what they're doing is in fraud. The whole entire system is in fraud. The courts, the political system here in this landmass for sure. And I would even say in the United States, although they have a little bit of a different structure. But it's all fraud. So when they're basing their foundations on fraud, they have no standing. The walls can't hold, collapse. And I think more of us put pressure. There's cracks in the foundation everywhere. Eventually, this house of cards comes tumbling down. And that's what we need to happen. We have to bring this house of cards down. So hopefully this is encouraging. Hopefully more people are willing to, fight the battle, whatever. And I don't know, take up their friggin' bow and arrow, whatever you want to call it, but we have to start challenging the system. Otherwise, if you're not interested in this, that's fine. You all have I'll say at this point in time, you all still have the right to choose. But if you want to choose to be a slave to the system, then that's your right. At this point, you can be a slave to the system. I choose not to be a slave to the system. I choose not to give no man or woman authority over me based on any fraudulent premises that they may present. Not interested, not happening. I was born free. I'm going to die free. That's it. That's all. And they don't own me. Nobody owns me.
And again, if they do and they're claiming ownership, where's the paperwork? I want to see that bloody contract. It all comes down to that, guys. No contract equals no obligation. It equals no authority, right? And people, they always say like the Crown versus so-and-so or the Crown versus so-and-so in the Canadian courts. There is no Crown here. There is no Crown in Canada. There is no throne in Canada. There is no monarchy in Canada. There is no land claim in Canada. There is no constitution in Canada. Not a valid one. Those are facts. There is no crown. So all you got to point out to them is that there isn't a crown. Please produce evidence of a crown. A Canadian crown, not a UK crown. We're not bound by any of the statutes of the United Kingdom anymore. We're not bound by any of that. We were all set free. All the provinces were set free to be their own sovereign states, individual provinces. There hasn't been a constitution bringing everybody together. All it is fraud, right? A bunch of guys said, yeah, these people are too dumb to know the difference. We'll just continue on as if it was business as usual when the UK was actively involved here. Nobody will know the difference. We'll write our own writs. We'll put our own governor general in there and make sure people know that they have the same authority that the original ones that were appointed did when they actually had title to the, and actually, if you want to get really technical about it, the United Kingdom's claim to the land is dubious as hell anyway. So what gives them the authority to claim any land? But because they stuck a flag in the ground? Their army beat that army, so that gives them the authority to make a land claim, right? But do they own all like the king basically back in the days way back when, medieval times and after, in England, if you were caught hunting the king's deer in the UK, I think it was a death sentence if they caught you harvesting the king's deer. Well, who died and made him king? Literally, to claim ownership of all the animals, all the creation, right? That's how deeply rooted the greed and the lust for power that's in a man's soul goes, guys. It's beyond anything even I can comprehend. And I've seen man about as evil as he can get. There's not very much I haven't seen as far as how deeply rooted and evil a man can be, because it's beyond anything you even imagined. That movies and TV don't even portray it.
It's true. In that statement that judge was talking about, that gentleman that got busted with fentanyl and he's trying to fight it in this weird way. The judge is basically saying that they get their authority from the federal government, the parliament that goes in through the provinces and the King's Bench Court and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, the federal government has no authority. Provincial governments really truly have no authority, because what is democracy? Democracy is based on the consent of the governed. And in this land, we've never given them the consent. That's it. That's all. Consent of the governed is a constitution that's ratified by the people. It's not happened here ever. So they don't have it. It doesn't exist. It does not exist in this landmass. So they have no authority. And if you want to even go back before 1931, the federal government is a fraud, and the Governor General is a fraud at this point in time, based on Statute of Westminster 1931. They make all the acts, statutes, and so on and so forth, and they get passed down to the courts, and that's where the authority comes from. And they call it the Crown, but the Crown never shows up in court to settle the debts. But beyond 1931, we'll go back even to the beginning of 1867. When they did the B&A Act, I told you guys many times, and maybe not so much on Sean's channel, but on my lives on Facebook, what that basically done at that point in time was make the Governor General the corporate soul. They were the ones that were in charge of this landmass based on the Crown. The federal government, even then, when the Governor General did have some sort of actual real authority, if you will, even then, the federal government was due to do nothing but aid and advise the Governor General. They did not make the laws. They never had the power to do anything. So since the onset of what they call Canada, the federal government has had zero authority, and it's never changed. And like I say, we can go back, like Sean said, go back to when they stick their flag in the ground. That made them the owners of the land? Not true. You can go back and look at the 1688 Bill of Rights in the UK, and you can read that. The UK, Crown of England in the UK, it's all fraudulent, even over there, but they do not have the sole authority to govern in the UK. They have to go through the Parliament. The Crown is fraudulent. They have no actual power or authority anywhere in this world. End of story. That's it. That's all. And I would like to see the historical document from the beginning of time where God sat down with the king at the time, whoever that was, in the beginning, and said, listen, you have this land, you can rule over this land, and you can rule over all my creation and all the people that I create from here for all eternity. And then you see God's signature on that document with King so-and-so or Queen so-and-so. Where is that document? Where is that document? And where is the document that all these banks have all these control over everything? Where's the document that they have all the control and they own all the land? I don't know. I've looked at a lot of historical stuff in my time, and I've not seen a document that was ever signed by God to a monarch or to a banker, giving them the authority to rule over us with this debt slavery system or with their statutes, acts, and regulations that they want to impose on us. I've not seen it. I'm sure it don't exist, but where is it?
Yep. All true.
How do we
brother.
hold them accountable? How do we hold them accountable? That's a good question. And it goes back again to the bond. I believe that's it. Like, first of all, I think what we're going to do, what we're trying to accomplish at this point is to get people to not get held accountable for some of these egregious things that they're committing against the people. But how do we hold them accountable? I don't think there's a way we can hold them accountable until we get access to the bond, because we don't have any arm of enforcement. And that's why they're getting away with everything. In this landmass, I think is one of the worst in the entire world. The fraud that's being perpetuated on the people, because they're doing things that are unlawful at every turn. And there's nothing you can do. You can't go to the police because the police work for them. They're all sub corporations of another corporation of another corporation. And that's the thing. When you marry the political system to the justice system, then that's a good question. How do you hold them accountable? The reason that they married the two systems together is so we can't hold them accountable. So they can protect themselves. They can rape and pillage us. You know, when Sean talks about the slave contract, let's go back into the time of slavery and when they had the sales, you know, the slave sales. In fact, there were contracts signed that John purchased this slave from Jimmy. There was a contract.
Yep.
So if they did it even during slavery, then where are they now? If they're going to administer rights over something they don't own, and if they claim to own us, that means we must be their slave. Therefore, if we are their slave, they must have a purchase contract to denote the fact that we are their slave. And then
why do you think that
the duties and
thing with the
obligations?
digital ID system, the social credit system, the digital ID, the digital money, why do you think they're trying to usher that in? Is because they want to tie this vessel right here, this flesh and blood man, to that fraud forever. They want to cement all that together into one rotten soup, for lack of a better word. That's what they're trying to do. That's what they've been trying to do since day one, since forever. That was the whole reason for the birth certificate and for the personage and for the creation of the person in the first place. So they could use it as a debt instrument. They could claim sovereignty and claim control over that thing, which they created, and put it in bondage, right? But until you're willing to stand up and challenge the presumption and challenge the assumption, that's how we win against this fraud. So we actively stand up as honorable men and women. That's how we win. And we challenge everything they do and everything they say. And I mean everything. Because you're never going to hear it. No one ever talks about it. Very few people actually stand up to them. That's what we need to do. We all need to collectively, and I'm going to talk about the landmass known as Canada. All 41 million of us need to stand up and grow some sort of spine. And I mean fast. Do you see what's written on the bottom of the header here? 2 weeks to flatten the economy. Do you think, I want to do a poll. Raise your hand. How many people think things are going to get better here in Canada in the next little while? I don't. Maybe you do. That's fine if that's your belief. I'm not going to say anything bad against a man's belief or his right to have one. As a matter of fact, that is the worst part of slavery. Is, in my opinion, one of the worst things about it is the censorship of free speech and turning free speech into a hate crime. Well, who gets to decide? That's my question to you. Who gets to decide? Right? And what makes them an authority to have the moral high ground to be able to decide that? Used to be, you should have heard some of the talk I heard growing up where I grew up. Man, I've heard some stuff, boy, let me tell you. I've heard some stuff. I didn't agree with everything, but I mean, I'm not going to stand up and say anything against what I heard or tell the guy he doesn't have the right to have that opinion. You know, how is a free society going to be based on that? You know, that's the opposite of freedom, in my opinion. Compelled speech. This whole compelled thing with the thing they were trying to do with Bill C-63, the whole thing they're trying to do with the LGBT agenda and trying to get people to use pronouns and preferred speech and preferred nomenclature and all this other garbage. I don't agree with any of that. Provided you're not physically damaging anybody, I think you have the right to say whatever you want, even if it sounds awful. I really believe that. Right?
Yeah, that's the only way you can function. Only way society can function. And the key is, provided you're not doing no harm to nobody, if you have the right to your opinion. Right now you do. I can tell you that this digital system is nothing more than another financial reset. They've already done it a few times. We used to have the gold-backed currency, and you could trade in your notes for gold at any point in time. You could go to any bank that operated, trade your notes in for gold. Well, that didn't last long. That went bankrupt pretty fast in the US and everywhere. That's when they come out with this whole new system, fiat currency based on nothing. Hold the gold reserve. It's no reserve for that, and it's not worth anything. They put a value to it, and they say that's what it's worth to trade around the world. They just create all this mess all the time, and now we're at a point where that system's collapsing. Whether we like it or don't like it, there's too many people out there that are talking about the economic woes, and I understand that to a degree, but you have to understand the whole economy is fraud. The entire economic systems that we live in is fraud. You're dealing with fiat currency, debt notes, Federal Reserve notes, Bank of Canada notes, all of them that have no intrinsic value. They're worth nothing more than the paper they're printed on. So how is that fraudulent? Do you think that you're paying for goods and services by giving somebody cash out of your pocket? And everybody says cash is king, and I get that on the concept of this whole digital economy, but cash isn't king. Every time that you pass another debt note to somebody else, you've actually increased the national debt. It's a debt note. You're passing debt from you to somebody else who's going to pass it to somebody else who's going to pass it to somebody else. And now we're at this point where the world is basically bankrupt because of the people that are running the financial system. $300 trillion in debt to a small group of individuals that lay claim to own everything. Again, where's that contract they signed with God? So this digital system, this will be the finite death blow of humanity. When they get this in place, if they succeed, you have to comprehend what this means. It's not just digital currency, and it's not just digital ID. It's tied together to such a degree that people don't even comprehend it. So some of the people out there that have finances and don't feel the pressure that some of us that don't have finances feel, and they think everything is going to be okay someday, I'm sorry, but they got a very rude awakening coming. So if you're a millionaire and tomorrow they decide to flip to digital, they're going to transfer your $1 million dollar for dollar to the digital economy. That's the game plan. So you're still a millionaire. You're still going to be fine. However, inside that digital economy, that's tied to the digital identification system. And within the digital identification system, you have to follow all the rules that are combined with that. It's also tied to the social credit system. So that means you have to take all of the shots and all of that stuff. Otherwise, you're not in compliance to the digital identification system. Or your social credit scores are going to go down. And when that happens, that's going to start affecting your digital currency. You're only going to be allowed to spend X amount of currency per month. Doesn't matter how much you have. You're not going to be able to buy extra. They're going to tell you what you can and can't buy. And they're going to block you from buying certain things because it's going to increase your carbon footprint. But also on top of that, right, there's an expiry date. So in 6 months, they decide that your currency expires. You have no way to fight back against that. Your $1 million is now gone. And now you're left, just like the rest of the slave class at the bottom of the ladder, getting nothing but a UBI of 2,000 or 4,000 credits a month. And that's what they're going to stipulate. So you will not survive the digital system. That is a death blow. That's going to enslave humanity. There'll be no way to fight back from that. Yes, we can still stand up, but what we're going to have to do at that point is if people ever stand up, we're going to have to rebuild the entire systems. And right now, we still have to do that, but we can do that a lot easier right now than we could then. So by standing up to the authority on every level, question the officer when he's pulling you over on the side of the road. And simple questions like, are you trying to administer rights over me? Where's your slave contract? You don't own me. You know what I mean? Just simple things like that. Where's the crime? Where's the victim of this crime?
You don't have to be nasty about it. You can still be calm about it and talk to him man to man. You just because he's a policy enforcer doesn't mean you have to be nasty with him. Just ask him a pointed question.
That's a good point because you're going to get a lot further ahead. You're going to get a lot further ahead by speaking in honor and speaking respectfully. I don't mean respectfully by bowing down and acquiescing authority. I just mean respectfully like you speak to your friend or your father or your brother or your sister or whatever the case may be, like you would to any other man or woman in a respectful manner. You're going to get a lot further speaking that way than you will be being aggressive, because as soon as you get aggressive and confrontational, now people get their backs up against the wall and they feel that they have to come out in a defensive posture. Now you've created animosity, and in most cases, you're not going to get any results in an animosity situation. So Challenge the authority at every point. I'm not saying if you're committing a crime and you've done harm to somebody, I'm not here to defend you. You have to have that ship righted on your own, and there's got to be karma and there's got to be justice involved in that. But I'm talking about all these ridiculous, you get pulled over and they tell you your taillight's out or your blinker light, you didn't turn your blinker light on, but you never had an accident or any of these kind of things. Like, where's the victim? That's not a crime, bro. That's not a crime. And with the whole travel and driving thing, we talked about this a lot too, but you have the right. There's U.S. case law, and I'll send it to Sean. He can post it up on his page. But there's U.S. case law that said in the Supreme Court of the United States that you are allowed to travel in your own property on public highways without driving license or so on and so forth, because that is commercial endeavor. And when you're operating commercially, you have to follow these rules because commercial is corporate. It all ties together. But when you're just operating in your own private conveyance, traveling from your home to the store, you don't really need any of this stuff. That doesn't mean you should go out and be ridiculous, but I'm just saying these are facts of law. It's not opinions. It's not, perceptions. It's facts of law backed in courts. That's it. That's all. Very simple. And so now they create a massive income stream. How many tickets do you get for lights being out or seatbelts not being worn or, whatever the case may be, any of these things, provided you didn't cause harm to nobody and have an accident, then those are all negated. No victim, no crime. It's just a commerce activity. And that's trying to create more money for the corporations known as whatever policy enforcer organization you're dealing with at the time.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the truth of it, guys. Nobody has the real full-on solution. We're getting awful close to cracking this thing wide open, though. At the end of the day, I firmly believe that the Lord is still in charge. He is the highest authority. He is the ultimate supreme being. And his will be done on this earth, whether men like it or not. It's going to be done. And so I hang my hat on that, but I also know that it's my responsibility to get the word out to people. You can call it a messenger, you can call it whatever it is. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, I think it's important to tell people what we know, and not do it in a look what I know kind of egotistical way, but in a manner that is simple enough that they can comprehend what you're telling them, and in a way that they maybe would challenge the next time it comes up in their life. They may remember what you told them, and they may challenge a little bit or start asking questions. And remember, too, asking questions is a good thing. There's no such thing, I don't think, as a stupid question. It's the beginning of knowledge is what it really is ultimately. You ask about the things you don't know about, right? And you seek the information that you're trying to find, and not necessarily information that just suits your narrative, because at the end of the day, I don't have a narrative. Gordy doesn't have a narrative. We just want men and women to be free. We want our kids to be free. We want our grandchildren to be free, right? And what's wrong with that? Why would you be called a terrorist for wanting freedom for your people, right? I never wanted to get involved in this law stuff or get involved in having being a truth teller and talking about things. But I had an obligation to do it because I didn't see a lot of other people doing it, right? So I felt a calling, I guess, if you want to call it that, to speak the truth. And you don't have to agree with me, and I'm okay with that. If you have a different opinion, that's fine. As long as you're not ignorant about it, I have no issue with it whatsoever. None. But I'm not going to shut up. I'm not going to stop talking about what I know. I think it's my duty. That's my part in all of this, is to bring the information out. What people do with it after that, that's on them. That's on your soul. That's not on mine. But I'm going to continue to learn. Gordy and I are going to continue on this journey. We're going to continue learning things we don't know. We're going to start putting more puzzle pieces together. And the great thing about asking questions in that situation where you're drug into some de facto court is that sometimes they let the cat out of the bag, and not knowingly. They say something that leads us down another path. They're usually pretty careful about how they answer questions. But sometimes they'll let the cat out a little bit, and that'll lead you down a whole other path. It's not a conspiracy theory either. It's just when you look at how, you know it in your heart, you know it in your soul anyway, that there's something wrong. You can all feel it, right? Those of you that have the intuition or the mindset to see it or to feel it, you can feel it in here. You can feel it in your heart that there's something not right. We've been lied to, guys. We've lived a grand illusion, and it's time to wake up out of that deep sleep, come out of those cryogenic freezing machines and be reanimated back into life, you know, because it's up to us. Who else is going to do it? I know all of the landmass is counting on Paul Vier and all these political solutions to fix everything. It's more of the same as far as I can see. That's what I'm not putting my eggs in that basket, to secure my future in that basket. That's ridiculous to me. That's totally ridiculous. It goes against every grain of common sense I've ever had, right? So you're going to trust the same people that caused all the division, supported the genocide, they supported everything. I can't get into that subject too much on here, but they supported everything and not one of them has come out and said anything about it. Not one of them has come out and said they were wrong or that this is what actually happened and we shouldn't have done this. And yeah, the court came out and said something about the invokement of the Emergencies Act was wrong, but where was the punishment? Was there ever any punishment dealt because of that, or medal handed out? Was there ever anything ever done about any of that? Them being wrong. So you broke a rule. Well, they've broken more than that. They've committed treason. I don't know how many times. It is beyond count at this point. Yet there's and supposedly Clown Shoes there has resigned. But what do you see? What do you see everywhere posted all over the place? Team Canada this, Team Canada that. Oh, my team's going to do this. I thought you resigned. There's no active government. They're de facto anyway, but the de facto clowns aren't even in the clown house at the moment, right? But still people are waiting on their every breath. Oh, did you hear what Trump said about this? Or did you hear what so-and-so said about this guy? When we should be taking our effort into learning the truth about what's really happening in the world and trying to come up with solutions to deal with the problems. Are we men? Are we women? Are we little children that are just looking to be entertained? Because I'm not offering a clown show here, guys. I'm not giving up my time and offering a clown college for everybody. I'm here telling you something that I feel a deep, deep need in my soul to tell you about, right? And all I ask from you in payment is to actually look into this stuff, right? Like I said, I'm not telling you I know everything. I don't, but at least look at the documents, check into it, ask some questions. Ask the question that nobody wants to answer in the room or no one even wants to hear it. You ever been in a room before where one guy stood up and said a question that everybody was thinking about but didn't have the balls to stand up and say? You automatically got to like a person like that. I know I do anyway, right? Anyway, rant over. Gord, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I do that all the time, and I feel like I'm the only guy talking about the crimes that have been committed in the past few years with this whole agenda, and we won't get into too much because, like I said, YouTube kind of crashes on it. But you guys know what I'm talking about, and I'm the only one I see on a regular basis that will not let that go. And then not me, I guess, only one, because there is some people that I know that I've connected with that are strong, powerful people, and they're the same. They will not let that go, and we shouldn't let that go. There's been massive amount of lives lost due to a friggin' fraud and a scam, and somebody's got to be held accountable for that. So I'm not going to ever let that go. And you can say I'm stubborn or I'm beating a dead horse, whatever the case may be, that's fine. But I'm not going to ever let that go. I'm not moving on from that because those people deserve justice and accountability, even if they're not here and they're on the other side of the sand at this point. We owe them that. All of the veterans that we had that gave their lives for our freedom, or that their belief that they gave their lives for freedom, even though we've learned that they've been nothing but bankers' wars now, that doesn't matter. They believed at that point in time they were fighting for the freedom of their families, just like we're doing today. And I believe that if we're not going to stand up and fight to protect that and take it back from these people, then I believe we're dishonoring those folks and the loss of their lives and the sacrifice that they made. I want to say one thing that I forgot to mention earlier with the court scenario. When you talk, first off, everybody go online and you can look it up on any website, any web search application, the presumptions of law. and they're there. And the reason I'm going to tell you that is because not only will you see what the presumptions of law, the list of them, but it'll explain what that actual presumption means. So you'll understand when they speak about presumption of public record, you'll understand what that actually means in detail. So you can get the list of them. There's 12 that I believe. There may be a few more, but look that up and digest that information. One key point in that presumption list is the presumption of public oath. Now, remember, prosecutors are lawyers, and the judges, justice of the peace, whatever, in most cases, those people were lawyers. So in that, they have taken an oath in the very beginning of their career to the Bar Association. Once they take the oath to the Bar Association, that supersedes and overrides every other oath that they'll ever take for the rest of their life. That is the oath that they must follow. And again, it goes back to you can't serve two masters. And it's another scam that they pull on a subconscious level. They take this oath of public office, but that oath of public office is a direct conflict of interest to their oath to the Bar Association. They cannot serve the public office and serve the Bar Association. This is the fraud that's happening right there within that one confines. So when you remember that and you bring that up and you rebut that in court, what's supposed to happen, and again, they don't always follow the rules, and we know this from experience, but in that instance, that one presumption being rebutted in court, the justice or judge at that point in time is supposed to recuse themselves from the case. And I would assume that the prosecutor should do the same thing because it's a conflict of interest. You have to raise these points and make the simple question. Is your friggin' public oath, your public oath in a direct conflict of interest to your oath to the Bar Association? Should that not mean that you have to recuse yourselves from these proceedings? Ask the questions. They don't like them, I know, but that's the facts. We live in this world.
That's exactly why you should ask them because they don't like them.
Right, exactly. We live in this world where they're taking total control over our lives. They're controlling the finances. They're breaking our backs. This tariff war is nothing more than a game plan from the 1% to collapse the economies in all of these so-called countries, which are actually corporations. It's not Trump trying to protect the American people. You think that this tariff war that Trump's trying to initiate between Canada and Mexico and China and all this stuff, we're bad enough in Canada as far as being a consumerism type of scenario, but the States is far worse than that. Biggest consumers in the entire world. And all of a sudden, he runs on the promise that he's going to lower food prices and so on and so forth. Well, I'm telling you, man, food prices from the immigration issue that he's dealing with and how that's going to affect the food and the construction industry. And also all these tariff wars, how that's going to affect the cost of goods to the end consumer. Who do you think pays for tariffs? Do you pay any attention to economics? Whenever a corporation's cost increases, what do? They pass the buck down to the end consumer. So the cost of goods are going up everywhere. On top of that, you guys down there are lucky enough that you don't have this carbon tax fiasco going on. But we're going to have another 20% rate increase in carbon tax up here coming up in April. On top of this tariff war, it's literally going to bankrupt millions of people. But it's part of the plan because then they're going to come in with the answer of UBI, and they're already talking about it. They're going to create a new CERB scenario, and they're doing it for your safety so they can take care of you. That's not true. They're doing it so they control you. When you have no choice for your survival but to feed off the government tit, that's it. Total control. That's it. That's what it's all about. Total control over your lives. That's where we're going here. So the time is getting short, and we have to come up with some strategies, and we got to figure a way out of this. That's it. That's all. But we can all start by pushing back at every turn against this structure of so-called authority that's fraudulent to begin with. Always go back to the base. If you ever get in a struggle in court, you know what I mean, and you're trying to figure this stuff out, go back to the simple basis of it. They don't own you. You don't have a slave contract. They can't administer rights over you without ownership over you. Simple basis. Contract law stands above everything. Without a contract that you've agreed to, full transparency with your wedding signature, it's not valid. And the one thing that you have to add for that, because people will come on here, and I've seen it before. Oh yeah, but you signed for your birth certificate, or you signed for your driver's license, or so you signed the contract. Yes, that's true. We signed the contract. However, We did not know of all the stipulations of that contract. They were not transparent with all the duties and obligations of said contract. Therefore, it is fraud. And you have the ability as the living man or woman to rescind any contract at any point in time when it no longer fits or meets your needs. Very simple.
I, the living man, known as Gordon Berry, rescind all contracts, known and unknown.
That's it. That's all.
Done. Finished.
So
Known
you can't
and
be
unknown.
trapped because exactly. And so what I'm saying is you can't be trapped by mistakes you made in the past because they didn't tell you the truth about the whole dynamic. You can't be trapped by that. So anyway, I don't know. I mean, we got a lot of stuff ahead of us, and I hope doing this stuff helps you guys out a little bit. I know I have a friend that's got some issues tomorrow, and I wanted to do that so he could hopefully listen in, and I'll talk to him and see if that helped him or whatever. But anyway, all of this is about just trying to help. We're just trying to help share knowledge. I think if you don't share knowledge, then that's how knowledge dies, and that's what they want. They want us to all be worried about our own little box, our own little circle, not try to help our neighbors. So that's kind of what we do this for. So.
My people perish due to lack of knowledge, as it says in the good book. That's absolutely true. 100% true.
And knowledge is power. That's the truth. Knowledge is power. If you know where you stand in this world, nobody can rock you. That's why Sean says a lot. You have to believe it inside. If you're firm in your beliefs and you know where you stand, it doesn't matter what they threaten to do or do to you.
Just expect it all. Expect them to threaten you. Expect them to do all of it. And that way, when it happens, you're not going to be shocked by it. You're going to be prepared for it. Right? I know it's easier said than done, but you got to find that strength somewhere, guys. I don't know how to tell you to be strong other than sure you feel it in your heart when you know what you know. And you're not willing to compromise. You're not willing to bend. You're not willing to do anything. I answer to God. I absolutely do. And I know at some point I'm going to have to stand before him and look him in the face.
I'll tell you this, guys. Whether you're Christian, biblical or not, and this isn't sacrilegious by any stretch of the imagination, but whether it's God that you believe in or creator or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. What I know for sure is whatever that is above us, God, creator, any of that, I know for sure that I was never created to be a slave. And I'm sure as heck none of you were created to be a slave. So the only way that you're going to end up being a slave is if you accept it. That's it.
Yep.
So I don't accept that. And, like I said to Sean lots of times, with God, if we're created in God's image, it says it even in the scriptures, in the text, we're created in his image, or we are the hands of God, or whatever the case may be. That means we have the power to change our reality, not unlike the power that they have. It was given to us as a gift. That's why we're here. That's why some of us are here doing this truth sharing and trying to educate people and the masses and so on and so forth. You know what I mean? We all have roles to play, but we're not meant to be slaves. We're created in that image, and I'm sure if we're created in that image, and I'm sure he wouldn't be a slave here on this world. So why should you? It's all about what you're willing to accept and what you're willing to not accept. And for what line it is for you that's not going to be crossable, I don't know what it is, but for me, it's long since been crossed. And I'm just trying to get more people on board to realize that they've crossed the line a long time ago, and it's time for us to push back soon.
Look what we have in here, Mr. Red Dog himself. Good day, sir.
Good day,
Thanks
sir.
for joining the madness. Yeah. How you doing, brother? Hope things are good. We're just on here sharing some truth here tonight. You might look at my little banner at the bottom there, 2 weeks to flatten the economy. That seems to be what Team Clown Shoes are doing at the moment. We're following a different path, as you know. But in any case, guys, we'll probably wrap it up unless you have something else you want to say, Gordy.
No, I'm good, man. I think I'm okay. No, I think I'm okay. I think sometime if you want to, and people want to, we could talk about some certain applications similar to tonight, but dealing with like CRA and things like that. We could talk about that a little bit and give them some good breakdowns. I think this whatever we're doing kind of tends to work pretty well, back and forth banter, and it raises a lot of questions that we get to answer and address, and maybe sometimes even open our eyes a little bit more. So maybe we can do that moving forward, deal with the CRA, because that's another one of these slave masters that are crippling you financially and just trying to rape and pillage you at every turn, you know.
Just a note on the CRA, that Baron David or Baron Ward affidavit will work like a charm on that. You can also put your own affidavit of truth and attach it right to the very first page of that, and have that one, the Barrett one, as an exhibit in the back. And again, just follow with if you want to know the lien process for that whole thing, just follow the video. She explains it rather well in there, what the letters are, when you send them, and how many there should be. And at the very end of it, when it's all bundled up and you put your seal on it, you send it out. It's now default by estoppel, which means that the matter is now solved. It is now, there's been no controversy raised. Your truth is the truth. That is the only truth in this matter. It's a done deal, right?
Yeah.
That's when it has teeth, is when you put the lien attached to it. It's all sealed at the end. You've given them their 28 days, in my case, an opportunity to cure, and they didn't do it. You never heard anything from any of their agents or their principals or any of their revenue agents or anything. And it all becomes you've raised a controversy and nobody else is rebutted. So therefore your truth is the truth. And people argue that. I don't know how many people were arguing me about the Barron video I did. Lots of arguments, privately and on the thing. And you're going to argue, that's fine. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to the simple thing, man. Do you have a contract? Is it valid or don't you? Everything else after that is BS, right? You either have one or you don't. And if you don't, why am I even talking to you? There's no controversy here. You know, it's been settled by my affidavit. I did not receive an affidavit from you rebutting every point that I brought forward as my truth. None. I heard nothing. Pretty obvious. You can't have a one-sided contract. There has to be two. There has to be a meeting of the minds. There has to be a full disclosure. There has to be something that both parties want. There has to be full everything. It has to be all out on the table in a legitimate format. It can't be hidden. And that's what you're getting with these license contracts and a lot of these governmental contracts, is you're getting a one-sided contract. You're not getting the disclosure, the proper disclosure. The minute that happens, it becomes fraud at that moment, and it's null and void, no matter what the policy enforcer is trying to tell you. And another thing too, you can ask questions to the policy enforcers on the side of the road, but don't expect them to adhere to anything you're saying. They may go home and think about it, but you're not going to win that battle on the side of the road. Pick your battles. Don't give these energy pirates your energy, right? Make them write their tickets or whatever they're going to do, and then you send it into them administratively within 72 hours and deal with it on that regard. Deal with it on the paper, right? But yes, you can have a conversation with them. Some of them will listen, like that police officer in Cape Breton. He sat there and listened. And not only did he listen, but it rattled him some, because at the very end of the conversation, he asked us if we were going to so-called screw him, cause him a problem.
Yeah, that was interesting for sure. The one thing for sure, so if you're on the side of the road and you're getting tickets, I'll tell you one thing for sure, don't accept them. They can write the tickets, throw them in your car, on your dash, they can get pissed off, whatever, but do not accept the tickets. Because again, that's a jurisdictional issue, and that's what I did down paper. I wouldn't accept the ticket. He actually reached in my car and threw it on my dash. But what was interesting, for those of you that don't know the story quite quickly before we go, it was interesting because the vehicle had a plate from a different vehicle. It was a valid plate, but it was from a different vehicle. I had my license and I showed him my license, but I told him I was only going to show him my license for identification purposes. I wasn't operating under that license. So I clarified that statement. And then the issue was I didn't have insurance. Even though I had a valid policy, I didn't have insurance on the said vehicle by the timeline that their Motor Vehicle Act says I needed to. So what happened was, interestingly enough, Sean had happened to have his little pack with him, and he had a valid insurance card. So the issue was, in Nova Scotia, when you purchase a vehicle, you have 14 days to transfer insurance to the vehicle that you purchased, because within that 14-day period, you can drive and your insurance will still cover it. You can travel and your insurance will still cover it. So I was well beyond that timeline of 2 weeks. So what I did, and I didn't ask him. This is the key, guys. This is what we talk about in courts or whatever. I didn't ask him. I told him. I literally told him what I was going to do. So I went back to the police car. We had sat there for an hour. I knew Sean had a valid card. I asked him about how much money he had. He said, I don't know, $300 or something. So, okay, fine. I said, just give me a minute. I went back to the cop and I told him, right out. I said, so this is your issue, the timeline of the insurance. Yeah, that's the issue. I said, okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to sell my car right now to my friend. And then he has 14 days from this date to transfer his insurance over, and we're going to drive home. Meanwhile, there's a tow truck driver there watching the whole fiasco. And the cop didn't know what to do. He 25 years in the force. He was just sideswiped. He didn't know what to do. Caught him off guard. So he says to me, okay, fine. He says, if I see money exchanging hands and a bill of sale and blah, blah, blah. I said, all right, fine. So I go rip out my notebook. I write a bill of sale. I'm selling the car to Sean for $300, blah, 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 whatever. And then I go tell Sean to come out. He goes to give me the paperwork. I said, no, come out. He's got to see this transfer. So he gets out and he's digging in his pocket and he digs me out $250. And I said, man, what are you talking about? We just agreed on 300. So we were arguing about the price. Not that it mattered, but it was kind of funny. Heckling about the price of the vehicle. But anyway, yeah, at the end of the day, I gave him the bill of sale. He gave me the cash, and he showed the officer, the policy enforcer, a copy of his valid insurance card. And that was the end of the day. He was going to let us go. And we did. We drove home from there. But I want you to understand this and comprehend this. Even though that transaction took place, that vehicle still had a plate on it that was not Sean's, and it was registered to another vehicle altogether. So he let us go, and we were still not lawful. Because if something, even in their legal world, because if something had happened with that plate being on that vehicle, and it didn't, because we're not idiots, but then I guarantee you, neither mine nor Sean's insurance would have paid for that damage, because we didn't fit the criteria. Because you know as well as I do, any insurance company is going to do whatever they can to dance out of paying a claim. So that officer, a policy enforcer, because he was caught off guard and he didn't understand anything, he let us travel in a vehicle that still didn't meet the criteria that he was trying to tell me was necessary to meet for me to be able to travel on the road. Anyway, it was a funny story nonetheless, and we got through it with some quick thinking on our feet, and yeah, it was a pretty interesting time, but that's how easy it is. These guys don't know everything. They act like they know, and none of these policy enforcers are trained in law. They don't actually know most of the stuff they talk about. They're actually dummies, a lot of them. But don't argue with them. Don't make it worse on yourself.
We had a pretty good laugh over it on the way home, I can tell you that.
Yeah. Especially looking like us, right? Two guys like so we just come out of
25 years. I've never ever seen anybody do that. That's what he said to us.
Yeah. The friggin' tow driver. Tow truck driver had quite a laugh too. I don't think any of them people have ever seen anybody pull that off on the side of the road at one point. Even the pizza place was laughing that we were parked at for an hour dealing with this whole transaction.
Yeah. I went in and I said, I guess we're not going to jail today, boys. And all the guys in the kitchen in the back were hooting and hollering, laughing. They thought it was great.
Yeah. Anyway, don't be afraid, guys.
Cut it off.
Appreciate you guys. Love you all.
We love all of you. Thanks for spending your night with us. We've been on here 2 hours, 28 minutes. We had 115, 120 people or something in here at one period here. So anyway, thanks to all of you. Keep it real, keep it simple, and keep learning. I guess that's it. We'll talk to you later.
Much love, guys.